Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflare. Hope you're all doing very well today, and we are back to Golgari Midrange, my list of Golgari Midrange. We're back to what I have been slowly tweaking over the last several weeks, and we've got a couple new tweaks to it. So we're back in the rocker's chair. We're going to play a modern league for your edification and enjoyment and entertainment here on the channel. So what are my three changes? Well, the first one is a simple swap of position. In the recent past, I've been playing both Tireless Tracker's main and all four Plague Engineer in the side. Plague Engineer is very, very main deckable. I still believe that we need a decent number of threats that can get gigantic and that can end the game in a hurry. Of course, Tarmogoyf is the premium threat, and Scooz can do that given the right circumstances, but both of those are, vulnerable to graveyard hate, at least insofar as getting huge is concerned, right? So I still really like having a couple of what I call above ground threats. Threats that can snowball and get gigantic while accruing value along the way, ending the game in just a couple big hits. So I still like playing a couple Tireless Tracker, even though some pilots have moved away from this card. I'm not one of them. Still really like it, and of course Hexdrinker can fit that role as well. So that said, Plague Engineer is also extremely powerful in my view, and extremely main deckable, so we're just trying to find the very best balance here, and you know me, sometimes I like to move a little slowly with my changes, so we're trying 1-1 main of Engineer and Tracker, and then 3 Engineer side, 1 Tracker side. So that was a positional swap. But what are the other two changes I have made? These are both actual changes. So the first thing I've done is swapped one hate piece for another. So we have a Grafdigger's Cage back in the 75. This card has been in and out of my sideboard basically for the entire time I've been on this channel, right? The entire time I've been active on this channel, and its position does wax and wane. I think overall it's slightly less powerful than Spellbomb or Extraction. But the first cage is often better positioned than the third Spellbomb or the third Extraction. It is just nice to be able to flex into different matchups. And, of course, Graveyard Hate is at a premium right now. We want all that we think we can afford, so it's very helpful there. It's not perfect. It's not perfect in these matchups. It doesn't shut off all of the Hogaak deck. Dredge can play Blast Zone to remove it, and of course Nature's Claims are everywhere, but it's still a very nice piece in those matchups. You slam it on turn 1, you go execute your plan, and you force them to find an answer to it, or sometimes you can even protect it with discard. But a big reason I decided to opt back for a cage instead of maybe a third Spellbomb is I've been seeing a lot of Neoform lately, and Neoform used to be a really good matchup in my view, and I think it's still fine, but the card Veil of Summer is a big pain. Veil of Summer, very, very good against us. If they're on the play and they open with Veil of Summer, even if they don't have an early kill lined up, Veil of Summer can still help them get there. So Grafdigger's Cage, a nice hate piece for the Neoform matchup. Obviously, the Collected Company, Court of Calling style decks are always around to some degree or another, so we're bringing the cage back into the fold. And that comes at the expense of Collector Oof. I love Collector Oof. I think the card is great. It is a Stony Silence on legs, and honestly, the fact that it is on legs is as much a feature as it is a bug. It's really good for us, but I just am not seeing the matchups where we need the Oof. If he was more reliably good against Eldrazi-tron, I'd be much happier to keep 1 or even 2 copies around, but right now, he's very, very, very good against Greentron, and that's really about it. I'm just not seeing the other artifact matchups where we need the Collector Oof, so as much as I love the card, right now I think, based on what I've been seeing lately, he is cuttable. We can play without him. I think the Greentron matchup was fine before him, and it continues to be fine without him. We've got Fulminators, we've got Surgicals, we've got things to do, right? So that's one change, and the final change here is that Vraska Golgari Queen has vacated her spot in my sideboard. Now, I have been pleasantly surprised with Vraska. I think she has been great. I think she's a very, very fine one of either main deck or side, however she fits best in your 75. But again, Eldrazi. Eldrazi is the big outlier. When I'm sideboarding against Eldrazi decks, I'm yeah, Vraska, Collector Oof, these cards are just very, very underpowered unless the stars align, right? Unless their plays line up against our hate pieces better than average. So I was just a little bit sick of having a lot of cards that were too medium for the Eldrazi matchup and just not seeing as much play as we might hope in general for a sideboard slot. So I am bringing back to try Liliana's Triumph. So Triumph, very, very good against the Eldrazi decks. Obviously lines up well against Thought Knot, Reality Smasher, Endbringer, all those types of things. Very, very nice there. Also very good in mid-range mirrors, especially because it has that 2-for-1 potential if we do fulfill the second half clause of this card. Also, Bogles. The deck Bogles has seen a resurgence of late. Obviously, Liliana's Triumph is one of the very best cards you could imagine there. And finally, it is a very, very serviceable role player, much like a Cast Down would be. Not as good, of course, but similar kind of slot along the curve and so on, against the fair creature decks of the format, your humans and so forth. So we're going to try Liliana's Triumph again. I think this card has gone a little bit undervalued by the community in general. I think now is a good time to test it. So we are going to play our league here. Those are our changes. And before we do, we're thanking a brand new Patreon supporter, William Burgess. Is an Inquisitor. Thank you so much, William. Really appreciate your support and the support of all Patreon supporters. I could not do it without you, my friends. Absolutely love you guys. And speaking of Patreon supporters, let's look quick at this message from our supporter, David Cordova. David, I hope that's how we pronounce your name, my friend. David Cordova has just top 4'd a 166-player MCQ with the Rock. Top 4 was 3 Hogaak decks and him with the Rock. You've got to love it. He says, thank you for all your teachings. I played the deck for almost a year. My list was very close to yours. I lost to Hogaak in the semifinals, but had a blast against the rest of the field. So, awesome job, David. Let's take a quick look at his list. Yeah, same creature spread that I've been on. List is looking very similar, as he said. We do have 1 Nihil Spellbomb hedged in the main deck. You gotta love that right now. That's a great decision right now. Couldn't fault anyone for doing that. And the sideboard is also very similar, but the big difference is 3 copies of Leyline of the Void. As longtime viewers will know, I'm not that high on this card in general for our deck. However, if ever there was a time to play it, it would have been, now, and especially before Bridge from Below got banned, but even now, definitely a fine time. If you're kind of on the fence about Leyline, sure, now is a great time to do it. So, again, you can't fault David for those changes. Those, obviously, with 3 Hogaaks out of 4 in the top 4, obviously he was prepared for the metagame, right? And, just quickly look at these matchups that he faced. Gotta have a lot of mental resilience to have this happen. So you're there, you're ready for a big tournament, you know it's going to be a long day, you're hoping for good luck, you're hoping for good matchups, and you want to play as best as you can. And then you do get a good matchup in round 1, which is Burn, and you lose. That is so... that's just... I can just picture that being so tough, but the mental resilience pulls David through, because he comes back and just goes on a run beating some... Bogles. Crixus Control is a miserable matchup, in my opinion. He beats Bogles, Crixus Control, Jeskai Tempo, gets his revenge against Burn, and then beats back-to-back Eldrazi in the winner's bracket, making the charge for the top 8 one of our worst matchups. He takes him down back-to-back, finishes off the Swiss with an Infect victory, and then beats Goblins in the quarterfinal. Does fall to Hogaak in the end, but what a run. So great job, David. Very pumped for you, my friend. That is awesome. And to all Patreon supporters, and all supporters in general, if you top 8 or top 4 in MCQ, if you 5-0 online, if you just are really pumped about your F&M results, hit me up and I'll give you a shout out here on this channel. We love to support each other. We love to see each other do well. And great job there, man. So good times. And without further ado, let's play our league. And thus begins our league, my friends. This one's a replay. I've got a very socially busy few weeks here that I'm in the midst of, so I might be leaning a little bit more heavily on the replays than usual, because sometimes I'll be, have time for a game or two and not much more, and eventually I can upload the league as a replay when I can carve out more time. So we kept this hand. It's obviously just a big pile of threats plus one trophy. In a lot of matchups, this is not going to be great, but if it's some kind of an interactive matchup, it might be. So it's Cavern of Souls into Aether Vial. So, the high threat count against humans, it can definitely help get us there, but we do need to draw more interaction as well. The painful nature of our mana is not exactly helpful either, but we do draw a Fatal Push right off the top, so that's pretty nice. And knowing that we're likely to start pushing or trophying next turn, I did decide to play a Goyf rather than a Scooze. Scooze is going to be a Grizzly Bear for a while. We only have one green source. It's painful. We have a lot of other things to do, so I like playing Goyf. Unfortunately, the opponent's got a turn 2 Meddling Mage, Blind Naming Fatal Push, pretty rough stuff, and we draw another threat in the form of Bob. So we're going to attack with Hexdrinker, trading off with the Meddler is totally fine here. We're risking them like vialing in a Champion of the Parish, but again, any trade grows the Goyf, feeds the Scooze long term, so that's totally fine with me. And client's a little bit laggy here, but I think that might just be opening game syndrome here, so we'll allow that to catch up. But we're going to play the Dark Confidant here. We need to continue diversifying our threats. We need to continue, curving out. Hit those land drops, draw more interaction, all that good stuff. So the opponent's got a Noble Hierarch on the end step, so it's been a nice curve out for them. And it gets even better. They've got Reflector Mage for the Confidant. That feels bad. Feels bad. So classic humans curve out with Disruption plus a clock, and we're looking pretty clunky over here. They've got another Aether Vial, and then a main-phased Meddling Mage naming Liliana of the Veil. So they're down to one card in hand, but the board is wide. They're locking us out of a couple of our better cards. We draw Overgrown Tomb, so yeah, the third land is nice. It's a shame that it's a shock land, but what we're going to do here is simply pass, because we've got the floor this turn, or maybe the ceiling, indeed, if we have the luxury of doing so, of trophying this Meddling Mage, and unlocking our push and then pushing something else. We'll have to see how it goes. Right now we don't have Revolt, but if they play a Reflector Mage, we might get it. They crack Horizon's Canopy. They hardcast Athalia's Lieutenant. With its trigger on the stack, they activate an Aether Vial for a Reflector Mage, targeting Hexdrinker. And then, with that ability on the stack, they activate another Aether Vial and Vial in a Noble Hierarch. So you literally could not have drawn it up better for the opponent. They are absolutely going as wide as possible here. So we go ahead and trophy away that Meddling Mage, and then our Fatal Push, as mentioned before, is unlocked. So we have a couple options. We could push this Reflector Mage to save some life, or push the thing that's likelier to be a little bit bigger over the course of the game in the form of Thalia's Lieutenant. I opted for the latter, but, looking back, maybe we should have pushed this one, just to buy the time, just to buy the life, and also because it's a little harder to come by Revolt. But basically, I'm just hoping that we can get a little bit more interaction off the top, and the Goyf will eventually, we can play a couple of Goyfs and it makes their attacks a lot worse. But we just continue drawing more threats, and their board is wide enough and tall enough that I don't really know what kind of a difference things are going to make here. This Exalted is a big pain, and we're now at the point because we have to kind of chump block with the Goyf, so very possible that I should have pushed last turn so we don't take the hit, or so we could take the hit this turn. In any case, we're just Bob flooded, we're just not getting there this game. So with only one painless green source and being locked on 3 lands in general by turn 6, we're just not going to beat their wide board on the back of Scavenging Ooze without drawing more interaction. So again, probably better to have pushed the Reflector Mage, But that does also give them some degree of inevitability with the Thalia's Lieutenant. I was also, the top deck potential of Maelstrom Pulse to hit both Reflector Mages was a reason to push that Lieutenant instead. So, like, any humans off the top means that their Lieutenant will in short order outsize our board. It's just kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation, given the fact that we just drew nothing but more, threats that are bad when we're on the back foot. So that's a rough intro to this league, my friends. We got absolutely run over by the humans deck, but hey, they're a top-tier deck through thick and thin for a good reason. They've got the disruption, they've got the clock, they've got the consistency. So let's take a quick look at the sideboard, see how we can kit out against this deck. Okay, so against humans, Triple Plague Man, awesome. Last Hope, awesome. Collective Brutality, quite nice. And Liliana's Triumph definitely can come in as well. So these 6 cards we do want. And these 5 can definitely come out. 1 Lily down to 3, 1 Bob down to 3, and 3 Thoughtseize. These cards are all pretty easy cuts. The last cut, remember we're on the play here for Game 2, could be the 3rd Inquisition or indeed in Unearth. Unearth is a little bit more reactive again, but the floor on just 1 Unearth is never that low, So I think for this particular game, I did leave the Unearth in, but I could see going either way. So that's how we would set up for the play for Game 2. Now, if we manage to take them to Game 3, Dark Confidant and Liliana the Veil do get a little bit worse on the draw, so you could consider moving down to 2 of 1 or indeed both of those. And on the draw, the 4th Inquisition might look a little bit better, and Tireless Tracker, if you're not high on the 3rd Lily or the 3rd Bob, you could play a 2nd Tracker in place of either one of those, so I think that's totally valid. But on the play, our 60 would look just like that. Game 2 against the humans in our hand is looking fierce. Double Fatal Push, Tarmogoyf, Plague Man, Collective Brutality, 2 Painless Lands. Yeah. Hello. Keep. Absolutely keep. No question about it. So, I'm just going to run out a land and pass there on turn 1. Opponent did have to take a mulligan down to 6 as well, and it's turn 1 Ancient Ziggurat. No Vial, no Hierarch, no Champion. Feels fine to me. So we're going to go ahead and run out the Tarmogoyf here. Pretty happy to fetch. We only have 1 tracker in the deck right now. Not exactly sandbagging the fetches too aggressively. Might as well just grow the Goyf right out of the gates. And also hold back our Urborg until, just in case they do, of course, have a rainbow land already. But you never know. When in doubt, don't fix the opponent's mana with your Urborg, basically, is what it comes down to. But the opponent's got a turn 2 Kite Sail Freebooter. This card is at its best against us in 2 situations. Number 1, when they catch us with only 1 kill spell in hand. That's not the case here. We've got more where that came from. And number 2, where there's a stalled board and some exalted triggers available on the other side, and it can be an evasive clock. Neither is the case right now, so that's a pretty tame turn 2 play as far as I'm concerned. And we could, of course, just be mana efficient and play the Plague Man and all that, but I do like killing the freebooter while we can, before they have multiples, before they start locking our plays out with meddling mages, things like that. I just like taking the kill when it's available, and that grows the Goyf to a nice healthy 3-4, so we start getting aggressive with the Goyf. Opponent does have a Mantis Rider, and that's the downside of our play there, is of course we cannot have Revolt for a 3-drop here this turn unless it was a Reflector Mage bouncing our Goyf. So Mantis Rider will answer back, and it is over to us. We draw another Collective Brutality. Interesting draw, but nothing that can outright kill the Mantis Rider here, so I like playing the Plague Man. Here is why. Number 1, it is mana efficient. Number 2, it's going to shrink their Mantis Rider. It's going to slow down their clock. And number 3, it sets us up for a Collective Brutality kill on the Mantis Rider next turn. So the opponent will pass. So they are on 3 lands, and they're a deck that plays very little at instant speed. And almost every creature, if not every single creature literally in their deck, can be cast off of the 3 lands. So we have to be suspicious for something or other here, but it's a little bit hard to say. We're just going to go for the Collective Brutality anyway, because it is... if this was our only form of removal in hand, or if we only had like one Fatal Push in hand, maybe we would do something like field the opposing Cavern to get Revolt, and then push the Rider for the guaranteed kill. But they don't know about our Collective Brutality. It's not like they're specifically playing around that. Remember, we only had one when they saw our hand with Freebooter. We've already used it, so I decided to go for the Brutality. But the opponent does indeed have a Dismember. Now, they paid life with Dismember. I don't know if they didn't notice that swamps, all their lands are swamps there or not. But in any case, we do get a little bit of value out of that because we make them pay for life. Then we'll try to get a chump block out of them. They don't take it, so we'll just push that Mantis Rider while we have the ability to this turn, because we do have Revolt, and so not the most efficient use of resources, but we're very, very aggressive here. The opponent's down to 6, and we've got some good cards still left over in hand. Our last 2 cards are very, very good. Opponent will go Thalia's Lieutenant and Noble Hierarch, so as we suspected, they do have plays that they were sandbagging. So I like, there are higher priority removal targets that could come as soon as next turn than Thalia's Lieutenant, but a lot of them are going to be 3-drops. We do have Revolt on field, but still that makes for a less mana-efficient turn. And in the interest of overall mana efficiency, with a mana sink coming down the pipeline, I did decide to Fatal Push. And then we draw another mana sink, so I'm rewarded for that. We're going to crack the Peatland aggressively, looking for more action, and look at what we found. It's another Plague Engineer. You gotta love this guy, just coming down, clearing the way, getting a kill, and presenting lethal. Now, even if they were able to, put up some big bodies, they're going to struggle to outsize the Tarmogoyf, and they have to trade off with the Plague Man. That's why Plague Engineer is so good. I mentioned in the sideboard tech that Collector Oof being a 2/2 does make him easier to kill, but for our purposes, especially against a deck like Tron, that can be a feature more than it is a bug. Honestly, that's the case here. I feel that way for Plague Engineer relative to Engineered Plague. Yes, Engineered Plague as an enchantment is often very difficult to remove, and so many more things in this format kill creatures than kill enchantments. However, the fact that it's a 2/2 is very, very proactive with Death Touch on top of that. It's just putting the opponent in a no-win situation when we're on the front foot like this, and you get a kill with the Plague Man, you're already ahead on value, and then whatever they do to answer him, it's not good, basically. So, in any case, some good aggressive curve-outs there from us. Lots of interaction. Tarmogoyf putting a quick clock on. Plague Engineer doing his thing, and we get a nice quick win back against the humans. So, we do indeed end up taking them to Game 3. We'll make those couple sideboard tweaks we mentioned in the sideboard tech. Let's check it out. So this time our opponent's keeping 7, and so will we, but I'm not the most thrilled about it. It's almost a mulligan. If this Plague Engineer was any other creature, I think I would mulligan this. We saw how the mono threats or nearly mono threats hand went Game 1. It's not where we want to be against humans, but it's a good functional hand. It's got a good curve. We've got a ton of interaction to top deck, and of course Plague Engineer is one of our highest value cards, so did decide to give this one a keep, but it's, you could call it borderline. Opponent goes turn 1 Noble Hierarch, sure. And look at that. Never didn't have it. Fatal Push right off the top, and I'm quite happy to push that Noble Hierarch. We're just trying to slow them down. Just trying to slow them down. We've got a lot of good gas in hand. And they go turn 2 Thalia. Well, that's one thing that our mono threats hand lines up pretty well against, right? So, Thalia it is. We draw another Fatal Push. Such good draws. So we could have played a Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf outsizes Thalia. Here's the problem with that. It does not guarantee turn 3 Plague Man. And right now, we want to make sure we are guaranteeing turn 3 Plague Man for mana efficiency purposes, also because he will come down and just kill Thalia, or if they found a way to buff her with Lieutenant or Mayor of Avabruck, it will kill the latter. So we're pretty much guaranteeing ourselves a turn 3 kill with the Plague Man. And indeed, it's Thalia's lieutenant, so Thalia is big enough that our Tarmogoyf could not wall off its attack yet anyway. We just ripped 3 kill spells off the top now with that Collective Brutality on turn 3. You gotta love it, but we're sticking to plan A. Plague Engineer kills your Thalia's lieutenant, shrinks your Thalia herself. And our Savannah Lions, Hexdrinker, getting angry, cracking back. Might as well, right? We can't block effectively with it anyway. So, opponent will go for the turn 4 Reflector Mage. Continues to be a huge thorn in our side, one of the very best cards against us. Tempos us out and helps aggro us out as well. And the Thalia is back to a 3-2. Plague Man's locked out for a turn. We draw Scavenging Ooze. It's a fine draw. It's a very fine draw, but we currently have too much to do to make it absolutely great. So instead, we're just going to Brutality away that Thalia. Now, there is an argument for having so much gas in hand that we're supposed to simply escalate, like pitching a Tarmogoyf or something as well. You know, I could almost buy that, and I actually almost did, just to gain 2 life so we're not getting aggroed out. But, you know, with our hand, and with the ability of the humans deck to grind, especially because they've got 2 redraws on field, I said, I still think that's a little aggressive, a little unnecessary. So we just used it as a clunky 3-mana kill spell, and the opponent's got a great turn here. They've got Champion of the Parish into Mantis Rider. They're coming across, hitting us for 5. And now we're kind of throwing away the Hexdrinker as a chump blocker. I think we've kind of got to. They pretty much had as aggressive of a turn as you could imagine there. And thankfully we do draw an untapped land. We kind of do just want to curve out here. So we want to set ourselves up to start gaining a little life with Scavenging Ooze, but we don't have quite enough green sources, in my view, to justify going all in there on the Skoos and just passing. Yes, we can hold up Fatal Push that way, but playing Tarmogoyf is just as good right now as walling off the champion, and we cannot get Fatal Push, we cannot get Revolt quite yet to hit the Mantis Rider. Now, that was our other play there, is to, you know, just basically field something and then push the Mantis Rider, but that is so mana inefficient, it leaves us with no board. I don't think we can do that, so I think we need to put our faith in the Goyf, try to untap with Skoos next turn. We really want to fade Reflector Mage. Opponent will crack a Silent Clearing here, and what do they have? We really want to fade the Reflector Mage. It's not a Reflector, but it's just about the second worst thing, so another Mantis Rider. Absolutely brutal, guys. Really brutal given how low our life total already is. So the opponent thinks about sending the whole board in, and instead opts for the safer attack of just merely hitting us with a couple 3/3 Flying Vigilant haste guys. Now, very interesting decision point for the OP. If they had attacked with both, we would have been priced into blocking with both, or we would have gone to 1. That would have been a really, really interesting call. I think either way, our Tarmogoyf just gets to eat the Champion of the Parish, but are we priced into chumping with Skoos? I don't know. But we don't have to make that decision because the opponent didn't attack along the ground. And I understand that. They don't want to throw away their things heedlessly. They don't want to give the Skoos more fuel. You know, we could have a Maelstrom Pulse here or something, so here our opponent messaged us and said, hey, how many Plague Engineers do you play? That card's great against me. And I said, yeah, the full 4, because he is awesome. So anyway, we draw another land, and it's a Field of Ruin. So here we've got the Plague Engineer to shrink their board. We could play another Tarmogoyf to really seal off the ground. I don't think either of those things are good enough. I think we need to make sure we're revolting this turn and pushing a Mantis Rider. It's also a great opportunity to get their second Canopy land right off the field here and, prevent them from continuing to churn through their deck. We go get Basic Forest because we're fixing our mana for Skoos. Then we'll push a Mantis Rider, and we are going to pass, bluffing, but really just holding up a couple of Skoos activations. We're at 3 life. Opponent comes across for 3. We gotta gain at least 1 life right now. That's what we do. We go down to 1. We are on the ropes. Opponent with 2 cards in hand, and they find Ariuk Champion. Decent card against us. It's better against Jund. It's better against, like Black Rat Goblins. It's better against a lot of other things, but you will see it in against us. Our high quantity of green creatures means it's not all that terrible, but it's still an annoyance. So they get to continue going wider, buffing the champion, gaining some life, all that good stuff. End step will gobble up another dead man with the Ooze, and we draw Inquisition of Kozilek. Now, it's possible that they have a 3-drop in hand, but it's pretty unlikely, right? It's pretty unlikely. They cracked a canopy pretty aggressively 2 turns ago. They may have been sitting on a land for a while, and I would imagine that most 3-drops get played at that situation over Auric Champion. So I think we're assuming that that Inquisition's going to blank, and therefore we're going to play the Plague Man, and that's a beautiful thing. That's an answer to the champion. It's going to debuff their board, crucially including the Mantis Rider. It's going to give us a little more Scooze fuel, and it's going to shore up the ground. And then we've just got to gain life this turn. We can't afford to play the Tarmogoyf. We're just relying on the Scooze to stabilize us. There comes an Ancient Ziggurat. Pretty clear sign they've got another land in hand, so the opponent is starting to flood out a tad. And sure enough, we'll stay just ahead of that Mantis Rider. Once again, Scooze keeping us above water. End step will eat another thing, and all of a sudden we've got a massive board. We draw Dark Confidant, so the opponent's flooded a bit the past couple turns, but we've hit some bricks. Inquisition's a brick, Dark Confidant's a brick, given how low our life total is. So what do we do here? Think about what you would do. I'm going to attack with the Ooze. So why am I attacking with the Ooze? Well, we've got the ground is nice and clogged up. They've got 2 things. We've got 2 things. We've got another Tarmogoyf to play this turn. In future turns, we've even got Hissing Quagmire to activate. So we really need... Eventually, we are going to run out of creatures to eat. There's only 2 left. So we need to try to get some damage across now before the opponent draws Reflector Mage or draws another Mantis Rider or Anthem effects or just eventually outgrinds us, which they can do. If we don't draw removal, which we have not been, then that can very realistically happen. So we could have, done maybe, fixed our mana even more with a Field of Ruin, but I would rather kind of bluff, because if the opponent draws something proactive to do something that might make them say, the Scooze is getting too big, I'm just going to go for it, I don't think it hurts to bluff here. Don't think it hurts to bluff and make them think twice. But in any case, once again, we're not really holding anything else up besides the Ooze activations. That's also why I didn't activate with the Ooze before I connected for damage, by the way. It would have been fairly free to do it once, but I just said, realistically speaking, it's not going to change things. Like, putting them to 8 is totally fine. It means they're dead to Scooze, plus one of our 2/2s hitting Quagmire Engineer, or to both Goyfs, or to everything besides, or to like 1 Goyf, 1 Plague Man, 1 Quagmire. There's just a lot of equations that end in them dying from 8. So putting them to 7 doesn't change any of that math, right? Therefore, I just decided to fully bluff. But now that the Mantis Rider is coming across, we've got to eat once. And the opponent found a Dismember. So our Scooze was just barely ahead of that Dismember. Feels great. And they're going to Dismember our Plague Man, which means if we're not paying attention here, we could just lose to the Mantis Rider because it's no longer going to be debuffed. But we are paying attention. We're going to eat our own Bob and stay, again, just barely ahead of the Mantis Rider. Here's the problem for the opponent. They had to pay another 4 life for that Dismember. Very, very painful in this situation. And now anything of our main creatures connecting means death. So we continue to brick. Our top decks continue to be terrible. But our board is good enough that we are just going to turn them all sideways and see what happens. We could attack with Hissing Quagmire as well, but I think in this situation I'd rather just hold up all of the Ooze effects because, again, putting them to 2 versus 4 doesn't really matter, and the life gain could. So, sure. They have to throw away their entire board. Well, that's a pretty good sign, guys. I think we finally battled through the Humans deck, and they're going to play it out, though. They're going to go ahead and throw out a Reflector Mage that they found off the top. Very good, but a little bit too late. We'll just to be extra safe, we're going to gain some life in response, and the opponent will just scoop to our first Scooze activation. So that was an insane game, guys. We we counterpunched them. We took them down just as hard in Game 2 as they took us down in Game 1. And then here in Game 3, we were on the ropes. We went to 1 life like 3 different times. We were just barely ahead of the Mantis Riders, plural, through a combination of Plague Engineer debuff and Skoos gaining us life. Tarmogoyf holding down the ground really well and eventually just being big enough to end the game immediately once we had the luxury to, basically. So we had some really nice draws off the top. Push, Brutality were our first 3 draws, and then we basically flooded, which was okay. We needed more lands, and bricked. We hit just Inquisitions after they were empty-handed, Dark Confidants after we were too low to do anything, and then we were drawing Swamps, which just are the least welcome land at this stage of the game. So, anyway, absolutely intense game, really, really fun. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Humans versus Rock matchup is one of the healthiest matchups in Modern. Really a pleasure to play, usually very, very close, very skill-testing, and often very satisfying to win. And it's not one of those that really leaves a bitter taste in your mouth if you lose, at least for me. Your mileage may vary, but Humans versus Rock, magic as intended, said unironically, unlike when you usually hear people say, turn 1 kill, just like Richard Garfield intended. No, this is exactly how magic is meant to be. Long may it continue, and getting the win here doesn't hurt as well. So, great games, well played to the opponent. That's our round 1. I will see you for round 2. So here, my friends, we have won the die roll, but we have lost the RNG lottery, I guess you could say. We've got a mulligan and no lander, and then we mulligan to a 1-land 6, and 1-lander is terrible too. But look, we don't like going to 5. I really don't like going to 5 in Game 1s. I am a lot more willing to go to 5 if the opening 7 and 6 are that bad in games 2 and 3, because I know that my 60 cards are going to all line up as well as possible against the opponent. In game 1s, I'm going to have some dead cards already. I don't know what I'm up against. I don't know what I'm mulliganing toward. So I am a lot more inclined to keep risky hands in blind game 1s. And this one is not even that risky if it keep, because we've got triple discard. We've got 2/2 drop threats. So I think the either the Plague Man or the Skoos, being the most mana-hungry cards in our hand, have to get bottomed. And, I did just at the end of the day decide to bottom the Plague Man. It's just the one that costs the most, and, Skoos, if nothing else, will be a Grizzly Bear that we can play without hitting the 3rd land, right? So we'll go ahead and Infection Shock. The opponent has mulliganed as well, thankfully, and we see some kind of a 4-color value deck. Everything but black is involved, and yet they're fetching for basic lands. So right away I'm suspicious for, we know there are snow mechanics involved because we see Ice Fang Coatl. I'm also suspicious for Blood Moon. So add that to our list of worries, having mulligan to the 1-lander, and now we might be against Blood Moon. So what do we do here? So Saheeli makes me suspicious for the Copycat combo, Saheeli plus Felidar Guardian. Saheeli's not very powerful otherwise, but I've seen stranger one-of value-oriented plays, so it could be a value piece, or it could be the Copycat deck. We do see Coatl, which is a guaranteed 2-for-1 Lightning Bolt. His Lightning Bolt and then Teferi is also a more or less guaranteed 2-for-1 against our progression. So what do we take here? Well, I decided to take the Coatl, because that means if we draw a 2nd land, we can play the Goyf on curve, and then we can go back to interacting with our discard before their Planeswalkers come down. Whereas if we leave the Coatl, we've got to choose between taking it with discard next turn or playing the Goyf. And Coatl's very, very good against Goyf. We do it. We draw the 2nd land, so that is awesome. There is a tension here between wanting black for double discard and green for more Skoos and basics for Blood Moon. I opted to get Swamp because I'm worried about Blood Moon, and we definitely want double discard next turn. So we're making our Skoos worse, but that is what it is. Opponent will show us a land that we didn't know they had, so we still know their whole hand except 1, and we draw our 3rd land. So the keep has been rewarded, officially rewarded. We're going to run out the Field of Ruin first to play around any kind of, Spell Pierce style permission. You just don't know what these types of decks can have. And the only thing that we didn't know about is a snow-covered forest, so pretty easy takes here. We take one Planeswalker, then we take away the other, leave them with 2 lands and a Lightning Bolt in hand against our Goyf. Seems pretty great to me. Goyf is a nice healthy 4/5 end step. The opponent will get a Hallowed Fountain. So now we're kind of down to top deck wars, and we have gas in hand. They kind of don't. We draw Liliana the Veil. So very interesting draw here. If I play the Liliana, if she resolves, they're going to pitch the Forest, one imagines, and I'm going to pitch the Scooze, neither one of which grows the Goyf. So we're going to attack with the Goyf first, see what they've got. They've got nothing. Always worried about Icefang Coatl trading up with Goyf, but I think Liliana's the clearly correct play here, because like running this deck out of resources seems good. Setting ourselves up for a couple Edicts if we need that seems good, and Scooze is just going to trade with their Lightning Bolt anyway, right? So I'd rather just get the Lily down, take up right now. And sure enough, they get rid of that forest. And step, they go get Snow-Covered Island. And then they play a Snow-Covered Plains. What did they find? Well, they found another Teferi. Such an annoying card. Such an annoying card, but he'll bounce the Goyf. And we drew Fatal Push. Yeah, pretty dead at this stage of the game, so we'll just take up first, pitch the Goyf, or excuse me, pitch the push, replay the Goyf, back to the opponent, and they lose an island, so they've been flooding, and they've still got that Lightning Bolt in hand, plus whatever they find off the draw step. And off the draw step, they find Felidar Guardian, so very annoying here. It's a creature, it blinks the Teferi, it lets the Teferi reset our Goyf, it lets them draw. It's just the beginning of a value train. We draw Abrupt Decay. Interesting draw. So we could do a couple different things here, but if we at all plan to take up the Liliana, that involves losing either our Decay or our Goyf. I don't think that's correct. They clearly play some Decay targets, and Goyf is clearly an issue for them. 2 hits from the Goyf and they're dead. So I think it's the better play to simply redeploy the Goyf. Edict away the Guardian. This does open us up to Lily being lost to Lightning Bolt, but that's still a 2-for-1 in our favor, and it really forces them to find more gas and more answers. Sure enough, Teferi will take up, Bolt will take care of Lily. What else have they found? Well, they found a Spellskite. Okay. And interesting. We draw a land, not the greatest, but what that does allow us to do is go take them off of red mana, which could indeed be nice. They might have a basic mountain in the deck, but with a 4-color deck, maybe they cannot afford basic mountain. It's the least likely basic for them to play, at least I know that. And it also lets us fix our own mana. Again, we're still a little bit suspicious for Blood Moon. They get a forest, so it also took them off of green, right? So that forced them maybe to choose between red and green. Hard to say, but in any case, we're going to go ahead and Abrupt Decay the Spellskite, because if this works, it's just the, clear way to take care of their whole board. We kill the Spellskite, we attack the Teferi off the board, then we have answered everything, they still have to deal with the Goyf. We could, of course, have decayed the Teferi, and they could just redirect it to the Spellskite. So if we think the life matters, that's fine, but if we think they might not make that play, then we would rather just make sure we get rid of the Spellskite. Sadly, our opponent's last card in hand was a Path to Exile, so they've been hitting the gas pedal. They've been finding some real good stuff off the top. But here they just find another basic land. Still no red mana. Sadly, we find a basic land too, so we're just back in top deck wars. The opponent top decks Oath of Nissa. Oath of Nissa will find a Steam Vent, so they're back on red mana, but they're continuing to flood out a bit. They do have that Teferi, though. We draw another Goyf. We've got to play it. They're going to be able to bounce it because Teferi is obnoxious, but it does, again, put the onus on them to be able to answer this Tarmogoyf. They found another Oath of Nissa off the top. Oath is going to find Felidar Guardian. Teferi's going to bounce Tarmogoyf to draw a card, which finds Arkham's Astrolabe to draw them a card. And then they're going to play the Guardian to bounce the Teferi, and it's just a whole lot of blink effects, and definitely not the greatest for us. So We draw Treetop Village. Not a great attacker against that 1/4 Guardian, but it could come in handy, and all we can really do is replay the Goyf. So Teferi's going to go ahead and tick up. They've got a full grip now. They're back to they did have 4 cards in hand before they played their land. And then indeed it's Blood Moon. Our suspicions were confirmed, and the Treetop Village has been shut off. How good would Treetop have been earlier in this game when the board was clear and the Teferi was just sticking around to be repeatedly blinked? Very, very tough stuff. They find another Guardian, they reset the Teferi, they bounce the Goyf, they draw a card. It's just like a gross value chain, basically. And but we have a lot of really good draws. Unfortunately, Blooming Marsh is not one of them. So we have failed to hit the gas pretty hard here. We found a lot of things that are 1-for-1s that don't line up well against their recursive value. They find another Oath of Nissa for Tranquil Thicket. They cycle Tranquil Thicket. This deck is just built to grind for days. They play a land. The Guardians cannot attack, but sadly we are simply flooding. Tarmogoyf goes on the attack, and they have shown us so many blink effects that I think we are priced into attacking Teferi. That's very annoying if they have another Teferi in hand, but I think we've got to make them have it. We can't just let this thing sit around to get blinked by who knows what else. Seems like a fine enough attack because they're going to throw away a Guardian on it anyway. So back to the opponent, and they find Icefang Coatl off the top, so the deck's just got a billion X-for-1s. Oath of Nissa finds Saheeli Rai, and that's just going to do it. That's just going to do it. So they, Oath of Nissa, notably would allow them to play Saheeli even under Blood Moon, like if they didn't have Basic Island. But for those who don't know, Saheeli's -2 is going to create a token that's a copy of Felidar Guardian and gives it haste. So Guardian will be copied, it will ETB, blink Saheeli, reset her, and makes just infinite 1/4s. And that's going to do it. So feels pretty bad. I think we were on the front foot after our curve out was great considering our mulligan. We went turn 1 discard, turn 2 Goyf, turn 3 double discard, and left them with just lands and a lightning bolt in hand where we had Skoos in hand, Goyf on board. We are ahead. We're very, very far ahead. They're a deck that might not be able to play that many answers to Goyf, but unfortunately, after a little bit of flood, the opponent really hit the gas pedal, and it's just like blink into value into ETB and so many redraws. It's just like a deck that seems really built to thrive against other interactive decks. So feels bad, man. We could have had them, but we didn't quite get there. They stabilized, they took over the game, and that was that. So how do we sideboard against this deck? Well, let's take a look. Okay, my friends, so how to sideboard against an extremely value-oriented 4-color snow copycat deck? Well, you know, forgive me for not having played against this matchup a million times, but I think I had a pretty good approach to this. You'll have to let me know what you think. So a couple things that people might be tempted to bring in that I chose not to are these 2 cards. Let's talk about those first. So it is a combo deck. You always want to at least consider Surgical against combo decks. There was a time when it was actually better as combo hate than graveyard hate. I think that might be a little bit different these days, but it's still definitely an anti-combo card. However, we saw even in Game 1, they were really value-oriented. They just outvalued us. So playing a Surgical that trades card advantage for, taking away the one half of the combo, I don't think that's a winning line against this specific variant of Copycat. And Collective Brutality is okay, but they didn't really show me, for instance, Monodorks, or things like, some of the more traditional green-white bear-type value pieces that can die to Brutality. They were just showing me, Icefang Coatl and Felidar Guardian, basically. So I think Collective Brutality is okay, but I declined to bring in the second. I think we leave in the first one, declined to bring in the second. Poaching a Path or a Bolt out of their hand is okay. But I don't know that it's going to kill all that much, so I don't think we need too many of those. Now, some of this other stuff might not look the very best to you, so why am I bringing this in? Well, I think Tireless Tracker is pretty great if we're in the grind, obviously, and it's a good proactive threat. It's going to outsize a lot of their stuff. Liliana's Triumph might look a little bit worse, and it's not a great value play on its face because they are usually getting ETB value out of their creatures. But remember, if we've got a Liliana of our own, we can make that a 2-for-2. We can make that a 2-for-2. That can be really nice. And it can just be incumbent upon us to kill the Felidar Guardian before they top deck a Saheeli to combo off, like happened last time, right? Or to just kill the Coatl to keep attacking. So I think Liliana's Triumph's totally fine there. They could also be playing more value-oriented things out of the side, like a tracker of their own or something, who knows. So I think Triumph is fine. And also, we are going to play Liliana the Last Hope, which does make Triumph a tad better. And the reason I like Last Hope, but I don't like Brutality so much, is because I think we need ways to kill their snakes at parity. Liliana the Last Hope taking up can kill a Coatl. It's not card disadvantage. Plague Engineer, same exact concept. And Plague Engineer naming Cat actually shuts off the combo. They make an infinite amount of tokens, but they're all 0/3s, and then they get sacked, so it doesn't actually do anything unless they can kill the Plague Man before they combo off, right? So Plague Engineer naming Snake can do the same thing as Liliana the Last Hope does in terms of trading with them at parity. And of course, it's a good way to shut off the combo. And they could play defensive creatures like, Wall of Omens or something, good blink targets and good early consistency tools. Well, those cannot chump block for days against a Plague Man because it's got Death Touch. So once again, a matchup where Plague Man is better than he looks, in my view. Way better than first glance might suggest. So I like bringing in all 6 of these cards, and in terms of what can come out, well, I think we want to treat this like a mid-range mirror to some degree, and therefore we want to move to some degree away from discard, but they are just so ridiculously value-oriented that at the same time I want to leave discard in, because if they resolve spells, a lot of the times they're all going to be 2-for-1s, right? Or 1-for-1s with selection, at least. So for that reason, I just trimmed a couple Inquisitions and said, look, Hexdrinker is okay, but we're bringing in more threats. We are bringing in 4 more threats, actually. And so I think we can afford to cut 2 or 3, which is what we're doing here. And a 5th threat, really, if you consider Liliana the Last Hope as a potential win condition. I don't like Hexdrinker as much here because it's going to die to Lightning Bolt early. It wouldn't surprise me if a deck like this plays Renin 6 as well, so playing more X1s might be a little bit of a fool's errand here. And even beyond that, getting all the way up to level 8. Before that, they can trade off with the Coatl even if it's level 3+. They can bounce it with Teferi even if it's level 3+. The list goes on and on. Just doesn't seem to line up all that well. And just as a Savannah Lions, it cannot attack into Felidar Guardian. Doesn't seem like the very best matchup for it. And, of course, I think Skoo's, trimming one in a lot of these matchups where the graveyards aren't getting all that full is fine. Remember, they do play Bolt, but they also play Path, and they also play a lot of bounce effects. So, more often than not, they're not going to be killing our things, so I think Skoo's is a little clunky. We can shave one. Finally, similar story with Unearth. Fine card. Again, the floor on 1 Unearth is never that low, but I think I like all of these 6 cards that are coming in a little bit better than the 1 Unearth, especially on the play, where we can be more proactive and more threat-oriented, and I really like what the rest of our deck is up to. Again, open question as to how much discard we want to leave in. Maybe we could play 1 fewer copy of the 1-mana discard on the play, or maybe we could cut Collective Brutality. I think this is a fine setup, though, and this is what we did. So these 6 cards will come out, and we'll see you for Game 2. Pretty good hand for us here on the play, I must say. We've got a ton of resilience to Blood Moon. We're going to get 2 swamps and a forest, probably. Very resilient to the moon. Double discard. We've got a threat. We've got a kill spell. It's pretty good. Pretty great hand, not going to lie. So turn 1, fetch a swamp, Inquisition U. And they've got a pretty great hand, too. They've got the Renin 6 and a fetch. So there's the infinite draw value, basically. Plus the ping value that we were worried about with respect to Hexdrinker. They've also got Ice Fang Coatl. Classic 2-for-1, very, very good against us. So, but they don't have that many snow permanents yet. Granted, they do have the Arkham's Astrolabe, and they'll get there, but I think taking the Renin 6 is a little bit better there. But we might be priced into taking the Coatl at some point anyway. We'll have to see how it goes, but they're going to go fetch, play the Arkham's Astrolabe, pass to us, Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, and yeah, I rated Thoughtseize here to take the Coatl, or something else, but Coatl as the floor more highly than playing a Scooze. Scooze is not all that much of a scary clock. And we see Saheeli Rai. So what do we do here? Well, I think the more directly value-oriented play is to take the Coatl. And it's also better if we're going to top deck discard next turn. But remember, we only have 3 copies of discard left in the deck. We're probably not going to do that. So at the end of the day, I did actually decide to take the Saheeli. We're going to be a little bit more respectful of the combo, because they don't have all that much else in hand, right? And, again, I think you could definitely go either way there. But we also remember we have 5 ways now to kill the snake at parity in the deck, and it might not be the end of the world if we have to kill it, after it gets us as a 2-for-1, right? So we do have an answer to it in hand. We have 5 more ways we can top deck to simply trade with it at parity. So again, you could go either way, but now we're going to play out the Scooze. Here comes the snake on their end step, one assumes. And unfortunately, we have been flooding out a little bit, so we do need some love from the top of the deck. Opponent still got that path for our Scooze, but first they're going to go get another basic. They're going to play Oath of Nissa. They're going to find another Ice Fang. Okay, they cannot cast it this turn. That is our saving grace, but this one's going to hit us for 1. And then on the end step, we'll just pass. No need to fetch quite yet. We'll see what happens. There is no creatures to eat anyway, and we top deck one of our ways to answer these snakes, which is the Plague Man. So this was another really interesting spot where it's like, okay, we could wait for them to play out their other snake and then get them both with the Plague Man. But I like being a little bit more proactive here, again, especially because we have the Triumph to follow it up. If they're going to use Path on our Plague Engineer, then our Scooze might realistically be a win condition here. So if they had had the ability to, threaten comboing off or something a little bit sooner, if we hadn't taken Saheeli, our lines might have been a little bit different there. But we're going to go ahead and attack with the Scooze, force them to take actions right here, right now, if they want to do anything about it. And they're not, so we'll just, leave our land uncracked, still bluffing Fatal Push, but sure. So they take the damage. Then they're going to path on the end step. We get a basic. We'll go get another basic forest so that we can respond to anything they might have. Or rather, they cannot respond to our activation with something of the fetch land. We've got the swamp, but we've got the forest there. We know that's what we want because we're leaning on Scooze and because they have Blood Moon, right? So, unfortunately for us, they have found Felidar Guardian. Very nice value play as always. Blinking the Oath of Nissa, presenting a body, being part of the combo, etc. It will find Spellskite. End step elite, the Coatl will become a 3-3. And we just keep flooding. So we're going to Triumph away the Felidar Guardian. And I think that's fine. And we're going to go ahead and swing with the Ooze. And become a 4-4, and we're being very, very proactive here. So that's all well and good. Here on the draw step, I made a bit of a misplay. I think hitting the Stomping Ground here is fine, but they do have a couple ways to fix their mana with Arkham's Astrolabe and Oath of Nissa. So it's not... I kind of did it just reflexively because I was seeing a similar situation to last game. But this was a misplay because they have ways to fix their mana. I kind of realized that after I did it. And I'm also only on 3 basic swamps, so I don't even have anything to get. Not that that matters, we have all the mana we need, but still not a great play on the value axis. They also get to float that mana, get the Coatl down, play the Teferi, bounce our Scooze, and they had the lands to do that anyway, but they would have had to shock too, so a bit of a poor value-oriented play all around, but it literally does not matter, because we are just continuing to flood. So we'll gamely play it out. We'll replay the Skoos. Hey, maybe they're going to brick with all their 2-for-1s, right? Maybe they're just going to brick. And maybe we're finally going to hit a little bit of a decent draw off the top. They don't brick. Opposite of brick, Thragtusk. When's the last time you saw a Thragtusk outside of a Tron sideboard? Like, this deck is just so completely and utterly value-oriented. It is insane. We draw Fatal Push. Alright, well, it's action, but it's merely 1-for-1 action, and most of what they're up to is a 2-for-1. I'm going to try to bait them into taking the trade here with Thragtusk, because I am still ahead on the life total. Despite their big 5-3, I'm still ahead for now. And if they take the trade, that gives us the window to, like, top deck maybe Liliana of the Veil and start taking over the game from there. Maybe a couple turns down the road, but they're just going to take the hit, so fair enough. They play out that Spellskite. Here comes the Thrag Daddy hitting us for 5, and another Felidar Guardian. The value train literally never ends. Blinking the Thragtusk, gaining another 5 life, making a beast. It's just insanity. And we top deck another land, so pretty horrifying, my friends. And I'm afraid that's just going to do it. I guess it's not showing me conceding the game here, but I definitely conceded the game right here. So, feels bad. Feels real bad. I have seen 3 different iterations now of this Felidar Guardian Saheeli Rai deck, this Copycat deck. You've got Jeskai Saheeli, which plays a lot of permission, plays relatively few permanents, and uses the Copycat synergy as value plus win condition, as they all do, but it's more permission-oriented. It plays a lot more on the stack. The second variation I've seen tries to combo off a little bit earlier, so they'll play Monodorks or maybe even Utopia Sprawls and try to really accelerate out the combo so they have the potential to combo turn 2 instead of turn... Alright, not turn 2, I guess. Turn 3 instead of turn 4. While still retaining a lot of the value-oriented nature of a deck like this. And the third version is, of course, the version like this, where they seem to have said, I just don't want to lose to Jund, or Rock, or maybe other value-oriented decks like Blue-White Control. So they're sacrificing their permission, they're sacrificing their speed in order to play Thragtusks and Renin 6 and Coatl and Teferi and all of the various like piles and piles of value that we just really can't beat. So I kind of hate running into decks like this because I always just have to think like, what do you do against combo decks? You know, you're not a fast combo deck anymore by modern standards. What do you do against the hyperlinear stuff? It's always a mystery to me, but a lot of decks, you know, a lot of players just really like to come loaded down for mid-range decks if there's a mid-range presence in the meta, and unfortunately we ran into one of these. Now my play here was not perfect, and the opponent definitely out-top decked us both games, so it's not an unwinnable matchup or anything. I think the normal Copycat decks that you're likely to see are a fine matchup. They're a decent one. Obviously, this really value-facing one is a bit tougher. We can beat him, but it's a tough one. So we got outvalued pretty hard by the deck that seems designed to do exactly that. What more can you say, my friends? So let me know what you think about the sideboarding. Again, our top decks were not great here, but I think our sideboarding plan is fairly solid. But if you have any other ideas, let me know. So in any case, they do get us. Good games. Well played to the opponent. See you for round 3. Okay, round 3, hard on the heels of getting ground out by that Copycat deck, and our hand is a keep, but there's a lot of little minor non-bows, like lots of proactive things to do, lots of good interaction, 5 spells, 2 lands is fine on the draw in a game 1, but, you know, the Pain land alongside Bob is clunky, only 1 green source, and it's painful alongside Skoos is clunky, so we could have better, right? We could ask for better, but it's a fine one. Drawing a 3rd Bob is probably not where we want to be, though, so we've had some pretty clunky progressions here. We have had a couple of really good ones, but we've had some clunky openers and some clunky opening progressions thus far in the league. But opponent's going to end step, fetch a Steam Vents, Thought Scour themselves, Set Adrift, main deck, very techy one of, and Aria of Flame. This is Izzet Phoenix, so Here we go, another top-tier Modern deck. See if we can take them down. They got turn 2 looting, pitching another looting and an extraction. Mercifully, there are no Phoenixes around yet, but they're getting really good value in the first couple turns shaping their hand. We draw Thoughtseize right on time. It feels so bad to draw it there instead of having it for turn 1, but, you know, Bob is not good in this matchup. We don't necessarily want to just play out the Scooze to die to a burn spell, though we definitely don't actually, so I think Thoughtseize is the lesser of 3 evils here, and it also means we get to save a little life by not tapping our Peatland, but opponent's got 2 more lootings in hand, so they're seeing all 4 lootings in the top 14 cards. That's quite unusual. They also have a Flame Slash, so we could go ahead and take Slash, play the Scooze, and then try to lean on Scooze. Again, the problem is we don't have the mana to make Scooze great right now. They've got a bunch of bolts to top deck, so, and there's no creatures to eat anyway, and they've got more lootings than we can ever possibly compete with. So all those things considered, I think while we should at least contemplate taking that Flame Slash, instead we're just going to take away the Monomorphose and really force them to find some other way off the top to chain spells together and get their engine going. Instead, they'll go get another Steam Vents, and then it is looting time, and they did loot into a Phoenix. So, pretty bad for us. What else have they looted into? Another Monomorphose. So, you know, you take away their hand, you leave them with not all that much, and then one Faithless looting later, this happens. So, they Monomorphose into another looting, they loot into another Arclight Phoenix in the yard. And then for good measure, they Thought Scour themselves. No third Phoenix, but a couple Phoenixes coming back. They've still got 2 cards in hand, a bunch of lootings in the yard. We are on the back foot all of a sudden. We do finally hit a good draw, which is a Verdant Catacombs. That's a good draw. That means we get to get a second green source, and we also have Revolt for Fatal Push this turn. So the clear play here is to wait till they attack, so they can't come back this turn no matter what happens. And then we push one, we trophy the other. We're just saving as much life as possible, setting ourselves up for a good turn next turn with our Scooze, hopefully drawing an untapped green land. That would be the ideal draw. Opponent found an Aria of Flame, so their parade of good top decks continues. And that gives us the 10 life, but don't be fooled. This thing will end the game in a real hurry if they have any kind of consistent spell density off the top. And if they don't, they have lootings to get there. So we've got to find action. We've got to find answers. Fatal Push is an okay card in the matchup, but again, we really wanted to draw an untapped land, so we could go Scooze, eat both of your Phoenix's main phase. Since we can't do that, we might as well just not do it at all. And I guess eating both Phoenixes would not save it from the Flame Slash, which after all that is still in their hand. So feels bad, but we do get to at least eat one Phoenix here, better than nothing. And hopefully the opponent doesn't have much else. It's just Thing in the Ice and pass. So, a reprieve for us. They have one unknown in hand. We just really need them to brick on instants and sorceries, if at all possible, for at least a turn or two until we can get some action going. And since we are in such desperate need of action, like we now need to find Pulse, Trophy, Decay to hit Aria Flame, we want to find more Scoozes, we want to find just Tarmogoyfs, anything here. I did opt for Dark Confidant over Hexdrinker. I did say that Bob is bad in the matchup, but they haven't showed us, like, gut shots or lava darts yet. You know, not every deck is going to be on those, I guess, or at least not high numbers of them. And Confidant's upside is really high. Hexdrinker dies to all the same stuff that Bob would anyway. And we are now not going to get nickeled and dimed to death, like we're not going to get phoenixed and burned out of the game anymore. Right now, our biggest concern is Aria Flame. So for all those reasons, I think Dark Confidant, despite being poor in the matchup, despite sometimes being a liability, is the better play there. Opponent has Finale of Promise off the top, so that's among the very best things they could have in reference to the huge graveyard and the Aria and everything else. So they get to cast a Bolt and cast a Looting, both of which trigger Aria of Flame. So here comes all the value. That must feel pretty good, I'm not going to lie. So they get to just hit us many, many times with the Aria of Flame. Bolt goes to the face. They don't even care about the Confidant. Serum Visions is another find off the top, and that's going to put us to 1. Then the Phoenix comes back. I'm afraid that's that. So they literally just untapped with the Aria Flame. They had the Finale of Promise, and they just took us from whatever we were at, 20 to -2 this turn. Pretty horrifying stuff, my friends. This card is a very, very good card. It's incumbent upon us to know just how good it can be in terms of how we sequence and what we do. So, yeah, pretty rough stuff here. We had a really nice stand against humans, but since then our luck has taken a turn for the worse. We're taking a shellacking, but we never give up. We are always playing to our outs, and we can definitely take down Phoenix. It's not a bad matchup despite how powerful the deck is. We are pretty well positioned overall, I think. So we got to shake off the blood there from that wrecking here in game 1. Take a look at the sideboard, see what we can do. Okay, so against Izzet Phoenix with his 75, the major decisions are straightforward, and there's some interesting nuances around the margins, but major ones, Surgical's good, Spellbomb's good, Grafdigger's Cage is good. These all do similar things, but in different ways, and they're all definitely good enough to come in, even though they're not wholly dependent on the graveyard. We still do want all of these cards, and I don't mind leaving in 1 Thoughtseize depending on my 75 here, but leveraging more than 1 is definitely starting to play it fast and loose with your life total. Similarly with Dark Confidant, I don't mind leveraging 1, especially on the play, especially because they haven't shown me Lava Darts and Gut Shots or anything like that. So I think going down to 1 each on those painful cards is totally fine. And then from there, it does get a little bit interesting. Like, we have a couple kind of bad cards in the main deck. Like, again, that 1 Confidant's not great. The Thoughtseize isn't great. Plague Engineer, not necessarily great. Tireless Tracker, very slow as well. So what do we do? Collective Brutality, also not the greatest. Like, just depressingly bad at killing their thing in the ice if we really need it to. And otherwise, it's just kind of a clunkier Inquisition for the most part. So the one commonality to all of these cards is they're not really cards you want to see in multiples. Tireless Tracker, you can leverage 1 fine. I don't really like to see multiples in a matchup like this at all. Same with Collective Brutality, like, 1 time, okay. 1 time spending 2 mana to take away an instant or sorcery is fine, and even escalating for the little bit of life drain is fine, depending on the texture of the game, but you're never really going to want to do that twice. Plague Engineer is arguably the one that's the worst overall, but the best in multiples, because of course if you were to play multiple Plague Men, you could in theory stick both of them naming Phoenix and totally shut off their Phoenixes, but I don't think we want to go that far, because number 1, as a 2/2, you're probably not going to stick them, especially 2 of them, and we also brought in 5 other things that predominantly do deal with Phoenix without doing all that much else in the matchup, right? So, but why would we leave 1 Plague Man in? Well, we could leave 1 Plague Man in to deal... it does shrink Phoenixes. It is still a 2/2. It does force a chump block with Thing in the Ice if they're on the back foot and they're otherwise going to die. It can come down after Thing flips if our life total is high and trade with it as well. So it's not totally useless, and they sometimes play the card Saheeli, the new Saheeli, War of the Spark Saheeli, not the one that killed us last round, that makes 1/1 servos. So the Plague Man can wipe the servos. It's really, really not the best matchup by any means for him, but he's got a lot of corner case uses, so... what I would say is I actually really like playing all of these 1-ofs on the draw. If we take him to game 3 on the play, I'm less interested in the Bob. And then, do we play the second Plague Engineer? Still not sure, still might just want Tireless Tracker instead. A little hardier, a little bit more directly proactive, but that maybe needs a little bit more testing and or maybe depends on what we see out of the opponent's deck. So, as I said... it is definitely a lot of straightforward decisions and then some very interesting ones along the fringes. Do not lose sleep over those marginal decisions. There's a big drop-off in terms of how much they matter relative to, like, getting in your good cards, getting out most of your Confidants and Thoughtseizes. But because a lot of the people watching this channel are experienced, we will talk about the nuances like that. So let me know what you think about those marginal decisions if you're so inclined. But in any case, going into Game 2, we're set up like this. And here we are on the play, promptly having to mulligan a 1-lander with a 1-land being field. We've been battling against our deck a lot ever since we came out of that Humans matchup. Lots of mulligans, lots of clunky borderline keeps. We go down to 6, and I guess we're going to have to be satisfied with this, but it's got no graveyard hate and no threat. It's just got some interaction that may or may not be effective. The only thing we can be pretty sure is effective is this turn 1 Inquisition. From there, we're kind of hoping against hope, but we bottom an excess land. We keep our variety of utility around and our variety of colors, and we see the opponent doesn't have the greatest hand of all time. It's a functional one, but it may be better on average than mulling, but definitely not the most powerful either. They've got Bolt, they've got Monomorphose, they've got Sleight of Hand. So I don't think we can justify taking away Bolt without a threat in hand, so it's either Monomorphose or Sleight of Hand. Monomorphose ultimately just leads to the more busted things, and we need to really have them do nothing busted in like the first 3 turns until we can see several more cards. So we've got to give them the Sleight of Hand, we've got to give them the turn 1 play. And we draw another Inquisition, which does punish us for taking Monomorphose instead of Sleight, but hey, we get to Inquisition and know we're going to hit. And we see another Monomorphose. Do we take that again, or do we take the Thought Scour? Once again, I don't think we can justify taking away Bolt. This time I leave the Monomorphose and I take the Thought Scour because Phoenixes are just right now the thing that we simply cannot beat. We've got ways to kill them, but they're going to come back, and we don't have any value of our own. Like, we don't have any recursive value of our own, so this time we've got to leave the Monomorphose, and we're draw a land. Not very good. I mean, at least it's a fine land to have drawn, all things considered, but man, oh man, do we need some help. We really, really crying out for some help from the deck here. Back to the opponent. They will play an island. They will play Monomorphose, so a little scary, but it could also just be kind of a desperation dig. You never quite know. But they do go Monomorphose into Finale of Promise. This card is a beating. They get to cast Thought Scour and Sleight of Hand, so we just really have to hope they miss on the Thought Scour. They go Sleight first, and then Thought Scour does indeed miss. It mills over some things that are not called Arclight Phoenix, so we have staved that off for the moment. End step, we're just desperate enough that even though we have incentives to keep our lands around this early in the game, we're going to crack a Peatland. We find Lily of the Veil. Alright, well, I think that's pretty much what we're priced into doing. It's going to feel quite bad if the opponent has an Arclight Phoenix to pitch here, but I think that's the cost of doing business. We've just got to do something proactive here. And we'll pitch our Field of Ruin. They pitch a Vapor Snag, so alright, I can live with that. And then back to the opponent, they go Lightning Bolt on our Liliana. I think one of these islands has already been seen. So, hey, Liliana, we got a Vapor Snag out of their hand, which could be good later in the game, and more importantly, traded 2 for 1. That was a good start after a whole lot of nothing from our deck besides those Inquisitions. And Nihil Spellbomb is a fantastic draw off the top because now we are insulated against Phoenixes unless they have an answer to Spellbomb. So we're forcing them to find an answer to the Spellbomb. Even if they do, we get to make another value-positive play by cracking it in response. But having the Spellbomb here really makes it a lot less anxiety-inducing to be in a holding pattern against Arclight Phoenix. And since we're just drawing more removal, that's exactly what we're doing. So that's basically where we're at, but again, Spellbomb is a really nice card under these circumstances. And the opponent is also in a holding pattern. They're just either not committing or they're not finding much. We find Overgrown Tomb, we play it tapped. They find Steam Vents, they play it tapped. Thrilling stuff. But now we found something good to do. It is Tarmogoyf time. And admittedly, the Tomb was not that bad of a draw, right? Because we do need more lands than 3 to operate optimally, but now we've got some real action. Now we've got the Tarmogoyf, and no more Vapor Snag for the opponent, so that Liliana +1 has been rewarded later on down the road. Opponent's just trying to go off here. They go untap Monomorphose into Thought Scour. Still no Phoenixes in the yard. Still got the Spellbomb to battle through anyway. And then they're going to cast Set Adrift. We saw this was main deck game 1. It's going to bounce the Goyf. So that's fine. It's another value positive play for me. And because both life totals are so high and both board presences are basically non-existent, it doesn't send me into a panic. I'm not going to say, oh, let's crack the Spellbomb to like make up for the lost draw, so to speak. I don't think we do. I think we just keep our holding pattern. We've got the Spellbomb. We've got the removal. We'll just replay the Goyf. And the opponent is still ahead on cards, but, you know, they've had to 2-for-1 themselves, or 1-for-0 themselves a couple times now. So we're catching back up. Opponent will lead once again on the Monomorphose, trying to make something happen, and then here's that Saheeli I mentioned. It is going to churn out servo tokens. So definitely a good value play, definitely lines up well against Tarmogoyf. And they're going to Set Adrift the Tarmogoyf yet again. So partially because I think it's the right thing to do given the texture of the game in general, and partially because they are bouncing the Goyf. We're going to trophy Saheeli. We're going to trophy her right now in response before they receive priority again in case they have a sorcery spell to cast afterwards. And that'll resolve. We'll take care of the Saheeli. They get a servo, not that big a deal. And we get to answer the value piece. They do still have 4 cards in hand, but we get to replay the Goyf. This is the most persistent Goyf around. This Goyf will not be denied. You can stall him, but you're not going to deny him. So back to the opponent, and once again, it's kind of nothing. So we draw Collective Brutality. Pretty interesting draw, and we've got to figure they've got 5 cards in hand. Our Brutality could whiff, just because they've been so reactive, but with 5 cards in hand, and without any real incentives to proactively spend instants and sorceries, like besides that Saheeli, which we immediately answered when they were almost tapped out, I think it's pretty fine to pitch Brutality. I also think we don't want to escalate because we'd rather hang on to Push and Trophy for things like Thing in the Ice, Aria of Flame, etc. So Collective Brutality is going to see Flame Slash and 4 lands. Well, that explains their inaction. They have flooded pretty seriously, and Goyf is going to start clocking. Opponent will open on the Thought Scour that they found for turn. Still no Phoenixes. And then they do find a Phoenix off of the draw, though. It's a hard cast one, and it's coming back to us once they attack. So they're going to attack with both. They're in erase mode, and we know that their entire hand is simply lands. So we're very safe here to trophy the Phoenix. We know we're not going to be forced to Spellbomb for any reason without the value. And we draw another Tarmogoyf, so that's a great draw. And we're just really putting the aggressive clock on the board now. Hit them for 5. They're dead on board if we can push this servo, but maybe we won't have the luxury. We'll have to see what they come up with. They found Faithless Looting off the top. Admittedly, they've been flooding like crazy, but looting's a really nice draw when you're flooded, of course. So looting's going to pitch a couple lands. Then they're going to flash back the looting, pitching a couple more lands, so they've just seen 4 brand new cards off of that looting. Pretty solid card, right? And then another Saheeli. So the value train is starting to reassemble, and they will go ahead and cast yet another Faithless Looting. This time pitching Aria of Flame. Pitching Aria is interesting. Maybe they feel they just won't have time to leverage it. And they do have a Phoenix finally coming back, so we're pretty priced into the Spellbomb activation here. And that's a nice fat graveyard to exile, so don't mind if I do. We hit Swamp, not very good, so knowing that Fatal pushing a servo is terrible, we don't need to be mana efficient, we've got enough lands, we're going to take our draw step, and we get a fetch land, so now it's our turn to flood. Now we are, in my view, priced into pushing the servo, because we need to kill the Saheeli this turn. conveniently, our Goyfs have exactly enough power to do that. So if we don't push a servo, they're just going to chump both of them, and then if they untap, they find any other spell, any other instant or sorcery, they are back to making more servo. So that value negative play was actually the only way to ensure we don't get buried in value. But it's a little scary because we're shields down against exactly that thing in the ice. So, oh man, it's been a back and forth game with both decks kind of sputtering at certain points and really turning on the gas at certain points. And the opponent also has a Phoenix, so it's quite the board state they've assembled out of nowhere. We draw Surgical way too late to be any good, so all we can do is send in the Goyfs, attack the opponent. Opponent's got a chump block at least once, and they're just going to throw away the servo. We'll pass back and they'll scoop it up. So they almost put together a little bit something. If they had found a cantrip off the top, who knows what could have happened with that thing in the ice. They could have bounced the Goyfs, and then it would have been really, really sketchy. Probably would have been very unfavored from there. So it was a grind. It was a turn 14 game. There was an unusual amount of draw go in the mid game relative to how this matchup usually plays out. But hey, you know what? At the end of the day, so many decks still in 2019 cannot really handle Tarmogoyf. We saw them have 2 copies of Set Adrift spent on this thing, and also have a Flame Slash rotting in hand, which was not sufficient to answer it, and they found a Saheeli who generates servos, which line up very, very well against Tarmogoyf just in the chump blocker rule. Despite all of that, Tarmogoyf forced them to 1-for-0 themselves repeatedly, and eventually just killed the Saheeli, got over the line against the opponent. Very proactive, very good stuff. Excuse me. And yeah, again, mixed bag of progressions here on both sides. Kind of a weird game, but very cool one, a moderately skill-testing one, and we did get there in the end. Spellbomb was huge, Tarmogoyfs were huge, both literally and figuratively, and we take them to Game 3. Alright, so our opponent likes their 7, and what about us? Well, I think we finally got a good one on our hands, my friends. We do have 2 Surgicals. We don't necessarily need to, but, you know, it's obviously a fine thing to have. Inquisition, Collective Brutality, good interaction, good mana with Urborg and a fetch land. We can use that a couple different ways, but and Unearth as well, Flora Cycling, but the one thing that's bad about our hand is it's low on a threat count. It doesn't have a threat. Threat count 0, to be exact. But if we find one and they kill it, well, we can unearth it. So it's a good component piece of the hand, and we'll see how it does for us. The opponent goes Scalding turn pass, and look at that. Threat right off the top, one of our better ones, Scavenging Ooze. But it's turn 1, so we Urborg into Inquisition. Opponent's got a double Arclight Phoenix hand. That's a little scary, but we have the Surgicals. They have Monomorphos, double Thought Scour, and a mountain, so they only have 2 lands overall, but we take the non-redundant piece and the most powerful piece, which is Monomorphos, almost wanting them to Thought Scour aggressively into some Phoenixes so we can absolutely blow them out with a Surgical, getting rid of all Phoenixes, including the ones in their hand. That would be great, but their first Thought Scour is going to hit just Island Monomorphos, and then they're going to lead on another Monomorphos that they found into a Thought Scour, which hits a couple Lootings. So no blowout for us. Again, we were almost rooting for them to get the Phoenix that time. Didn't happen. We're free to go get a Forest here, plays better around a potential Blood Moon, and of course everything's making black with Urborg anyway. And we're also very free to run out the Skoos because we have Unearth to buy it back if need be. Opponent's got 2 Phoenixes, 4 Unknowns in hand, and I just went too far ahead. So, my bad. What happened? They went Thought Scour. Yeah, just Thought Scours, basically. Lightning. They went Thought Scour. Sorry. Thought Scour looking for the 3rd land. Didn't find it, so they just bolted our Skoos before we could untap and then passed. We draw Tarmogoyf. That's a great draw. So, we could also be super mana efficient there and unearth the Skoos. I actually think I rate the Skoos a little bit more highly than that. And they could also, I also rate the Goyf more highly than the Scooze right now, simply because we're sitting on Surgical. So 2 reasons not to Unearth. 1, it's still a little loose to trade the rebought Scooze for another Bolt. Number 2, they could play like Magmatic Sinkhole or some other card that kills Tarmogoyf, and I really want to be able to Unearth Goyf if that happens. Goyf obviously being a premier threat in the matchup in general and in this situation in particular. Opponent's got the Aria Flame, so that's pretty scary given the fact that we're, really well insulated against the Phoenixes, not so much against everything else, including the Aria. So we draw another Tarmogoyf. I kind of had my heart set on Collective Brutality here. Check the hand, take away an instant or sorcery to make that Aria worse. But Tarmogoyf is a really, really good card, and I actually have a reasonable amount of faith in my ability to erase the Aria. Again, given Surgical, which can have some interesting applications. Now, because we are more in race mode, I could actually have been happier to unearth the Ooze there, and I almost did, but at the end of the day, still kind of decided not to. It's not like we're totally wasting this mana. If we do have to Surgical, we can do it paying black instead of paying 2 life. Now, it also was a really interesting decision if we should blind Surgical at least one thing on the draw step. Blind Surgical, maybe, Lightning Bolt or something, because there are better targets than Lightning Bolt in general, but some of them are already mostly in the graveyard, like Monomorphos, so on. At the end of the day, I opted against that, but it is something that should be on our radar. So when you have 2 Surgicals and only 1 super premier Surgical target, you can potentially risk the second one on a play like that, but I decided not to at the end of the day. And the opponent's got Thing in the Ice, which is another card we cannot really answer at the moment. And then it's going to be Sleight of Hand. Triggering Aria of Flame, triggering Thing in the Ice, and resolving in its own right, but still no 4th land. And we draw a 4th land of our own. So we're going to go ahead and attack with the Goyfs. Put the opponent down to 4. Alright, now what do we do? So, once again, they're at a low life total. Do we unearth the Scooze? Do we Collective Brutality? Very, very interesting decision. And if we Brutality, do we drain them? And that's exactly what I decided to do. So rather than Surgical for, trying to get lucky with a blind Surgical, I said one of the other use cases is to pitch it to Brutality. So this gets them down to 2. It's going to turn off Shock lands. It's going to make Fetch lands worse. And it is hopefully going to take something out of their hand, and indeed it does. It takes Finale of Promise. Finale of Promise is one of the very best cards in this exact situation. We saw how good that was Game 1 with Aria of Flame, and we have Surgical to help compete over it, but definitely very, very happy to have taken that. And the rest of their hand is 2 uncastable Phoenixes and a Saheeli, who doesn't do anything with Aria, and doesn't have... there's no way to fuel her, nor to fuel the Thing. So our position is pretty solid, and on top of everything else, we get to unearth the Scooze. And now is actually the perfect time to do it, because even if the opponent has another blocker show up, they're still going to die to Scooze this turn. So I pass holding up 1 forest, and pretty happy with our sequencing here so far. The opponent really has to rip something perfect here to stay in the game. Has to have something either really good and or something that will flip the Thing in the Ice. And it's a Finale of Promise. So Finale of Promise is targeting Faithless Looting and Thought Scour. And that's actually extremely dangerous, because Finale notably says cast. As we saw in Game 1, as I just mentioned, that's going to trigger Aria Flame twice. It's going to trigger Thing in the Ice twice. Looting is going to put the Phoenixes in the graveyard, and we can answer them with Surgical, but then they're going to see 2 new cards. If they see land into 1 mana instant or sorcery, they flip the Thing, it's a disaster. So what do we do? Do we have an out? Do we have a way around this? Yes, we do. We just have to realize they only have Phoenixes and Saheeli in hand. We know that they cannot do anything else if we compete over the Finale of Promise, and we have the exact tools with which to do so. So with our 1 remaining green mana, we eat 1 Finale target, and then we're going to Surgical away the other Finale target. Faithless Looting being the better target, because there's other ones in the graveyard, and it's a high value relatively high-value surgical target to begin with anyway. And that's that. The opponent's got nothing else. They're going to be dead on board. They scoop it up. So, man, we unearthed at just the right time. Scooze actually didn't look like it was going to be that necessary, especially after we took the first finale of Promise with our Collective Brutality, but they ripped another one off the top, so you gotta always play to your potential, to the opponent's potential outs as well as your own. And we, at the end of the day, kind of just barely had enough to stave off what could have been a really intense comeback from the Arclight Phoenix deck, but man, that was a heck of a game. Just like against humans, we had to go all the way to Game 3. We were kind of on the ropes, and in a different way, admittedly, than against humans, but definitely came right down to the wire. Very close games, very good games, and we do pull it out of the fire, get it back to a positive record of 2-1 by taking down Izzet Phoenix. Good game so far, my friends. I'm having fun. I hope you are too, and I will see you for round 4. Round 4, my friends, and who are we against but the Dogfish? The Dogfish, this is a very good personal friend. Childhood Magic the Gathering buddy we have played since we were in 3rd grade or so, way back in the ancient times. And also, you know, so we played on and off, kitchen table style for 20 years, and then a few years ago we got into Modern. And the Dogfish here has been my main testing buddy ever since. Now, we played so many games on the free testing software applications, but we don't play each other that much anymore ever since we've both become invested MTGO players. It is therefore pretty amusing that I have actually run into him twice in the past couple weeks, and he got me the first time. He got me good. He's a Merfolk main, and very, very talented Merfolk player. A couple 5-0s recently, so definitely a match during which I need my revenge. I need it. I need the dish of revenge. Best served cold or best served wet against the fish. Doesn't matter. We just got to get the vengeance against the Dogfish. So good to see you, buddy, and you'll probably be watching this, so here's your replay. I'm not off to a good start, though. I did mulligan down to 6. Opponent's going to keep 7, and this is a fine 6. So what do we bottom? Well, we've got 3 lands, and everything that we have operates on just 1 mana or 2 mana. So it might be tempting for some to ship a land, and admittedly that is not unreasonable, but we're against Merfolk, and I know how good Spreading Seas can be, and they could realistically choke us pretty badly on mana, especially because we have Scooze and Peatland, which can be painful if they've got a Seize, so I opted to keep the 3rd land here instead. And we've already got a painful enough progression that I think the thing to bottom is Thoughtseize there, because we've got a Shock here, we've got a Bob coming, we've got a Pain land, like, we're in for a lot of pain here, right? So I'm not terribly optimistic here after the mulligan, given what I just explained about the hand, nor am I optimistic seeing the opponent's hand. It's a classic, very, very nicely balanced Merfolk 7 with 2 utility lands, an Aether Vial, and 4 spells. Force of Negation being probably the least impactful one against our current hands, surely, and against the deck in general. So what do we take? Well, the other 3 spells besides the ones I mentioned are quite good. Marrow Regere, if they get to untap with this thing and they've got more gas in hand, it's kind of all over. It's a Lord. It untaps lands to keep chaining spells together. Or it can tap down our blockers. It's very, very good. Silvergill Adept and Spreading Seas are both 2-for-1, so this is an extremely powerful hand. But I think we got to take one of the 2-for-1s. Could be Adept, could be Seas. I'm leaning toward the Seas, so we'll take that away. And Mood Vault into Aether Vial as the predicted turn 1 play. Sure enough comes to pass, and we draw another Bob. Pretty bad draw, so I'm looking like we need a little bit of help here in game 1. You know, the Bob is good and all, but the pain can add up really, really quickly. We'll see how it goes. Opponent did not hit a second land that is untapped, so they've got to play the Conclave. No turn 2 Adept for them. That's a bit of a reprieve. And Good Boy Bob flips the Field of Ruin, but then we got another Confidant to show up. So, of course, all we want to see here is interaction, and we're just Confidant flooded. We're definitely attacking here. If the opponent wants to vial in a 1-drop to trade, I'm totally fine with that, because we've got more Bobs where that came from. Didn't happen, so instead we're going to play the Skoos. Right now it's a mere Grizzly Bear, but if we ever find interaction, of course it can become a very, very nice play. They've got good ways to interact with it. You know, they can bounce it and things like that, but if you use the Ooze extremely conservatively in this matchup, it actually goes a long way. Opponent Silvergill Adept finally hits the field. They find another Fairy Conclave. I know that my buddy here is on 8 manlands, I believe. Last I knew, 4 Mutavault, 4 Conclave. Absolute nightmare to battle through against, for a deck like ours. I would not call that stock, but Merfolk's going to play a lot of manlands no matter how you slice it. Confidant hits continue to be painless, though. That is awesome. We flip Blooming Marsh, we draw Thoughtseize, so pretty clearly going to begin with the Thoughtseize here. And opponent's got an Ether Vial activation in response. Lots of good things they could have here. It's a Master of the Pearl Trident. Yeah, it's a Lord. So they drew a couple more Ether Vials, though. Those are pretty bad draws. So this is where the opponent's really good-looking hand has not really curved out, has not really paid off. We clearly take the Regiere, leave them with a pretty awful hand. And going to play Field of Ruin here, because right now I'm just trying to play the long game. So playing Field of Ruin first means that the opponent might assume that we are planning to field no matter what next turn. Therefore, it might make them more likely to take a trade here with our Bob. Again, I want them to trade off with our Bob, because then we just get to play another one. We get some Skoos food in the graveyard. But opponent doesn't fall for it. Opponent's going to take the hit, so sure, we'll just pass, and we will indeed be fielding this turn. We've just got to preserve our life total, basically at all costs. So the only way we wouldn't is if they didn't fire up a creature land, but they do. And they're attacking, with only the Conclave. I guess they're a little bit too concerned about a blowout. You know, if I have removal into a couple Skoos activations, or at least one Skoos activation, it could end up being a bad attack for them, so nothing else gets in. And we will indeed field the attacker. Go get a forest, and on the end step, we start growing the Skoos, start working toward being more stable. Once again, Bob with the painless flip. I don't know, man. We haven't seen too many Dark Confidants yet this league, but this has been a stellar display so far from Bob. So we'll go ahead, Hissing Quagmire, Thoughtseize you. See what the opponent's got. Harbinger of the Tides gets vialed in, so this is one reason I like to be conservative with our Scavenging Ooze. I don't like to attack when in doubt, because this thing, bouncing the Skoos, is just a good way to get tempoed out of the game. So I'm very glad that they didn't have a target with the Harbinger there. And we get to Thoughtseize, take away the Force of Negation, leave them with a couple of Ether Vials. Not very good. Not very good. But again, we're still out of gas in hand. We just have another land and a couple of Bobs. We cannot afford to play another Dark Confidant. I think that's pretty clear. They just start island walking past us, like they top deck one Spreading Seas, and the Confidants are suddenly a real liability. This one's been very kind to us, though. Opponent's going to run out an island, fire up the Conclave, and once again, I feel pretty priced into the Field of Ruin on the attacker. So, Fairy Conclave is overall a weaker card than Mutavault, but it's not strictly worse. Sometimes it's actually better with that evasion. So, pretty much was going to field whatever land they attacked with there, but definitely the Conclave, because we can't block it any other way. And then on step, we'll crack the Peatland, just looking for more action. We find a basic land, not very good. And Bob finally starts taking his toll. It's a Tarmogoyf that he flips, so we're down to 10. And now we're going to start, pivot back to the attacking with the Bob. Again, we have more where that came from. We just want to engineer a trade here. Opponent's not giving us a trade on the attack, and they're not giving us a trade on the block. Now, granted, the upside to this is we are just ridiculously far ahead on cards right now, but again, the life totals are of concern. We're not drawing kill spells, so it's all a little bit tough here, but we definitely get to do some stuff this turn. We get to play out the Tarmogoyf, we get to play out the Hexdrinker, and at this point, we're no longer bluffing and there's nothing to eat in the yard, so we're just going to level up the Hexdrinker all the way to 2. Now, if we neglected to play the Goyf, we could have made the Hexdrinker a 4/4, but I don't think that's necessary because we're not worried, especially game 1, about getting protection from instants. He probably doesn't play any. If so, it's like maybe a 1 or 2 Dismember, maybe a 1 or 2 Vapor Snag. Not too much else. Main deck, Echoing Truth potentially. They're more likely to have a creature to deal with this, which doesn't change until it hits level 8. Furthermore, we can still actually get it to level 8 next turn if we draw an untapped land, and we're drawing 2, so there's a decent chance that'll happen, right? So, I like playing the Goyf. I like just going wider here. Opponent's going to play a land, play out another Aether Vial. Their top decks have not been very good, it must be said. After the scary start and our clunky start, and our clunky progression, admittedly, both decks kind of sputtering a little bit, but we've got the board, we've got the inevitability of Confidant, and it was yet another painless head off of Bob. You've got to love that. You've got to love it. Bob showing up huge, and now it's time to just go all in on Hexdrinker. And so how do we attack? Well, I'm going to attack this way. So leaving Bob back as a blocker is actually probably more likely on average to result in us dying than, just sending it in and hoping for a trade. The really nice thing about attacking with him is it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't for our opponent. If they trade, that plays into our hands. We're not taking a Bob hit next turn. We've got more Scoo's fuel and all that. And they're 1 creature down in terms of cracking back. But if they let it through like they did, they're just dead next turn to Hexdrinker, so they have to kill us this turn. Maybe they were supposed to block anyway, even though we clearly wanted them to. Maybe they kind of had to take the block on Bob, because they can't stop the Hexdrinker, I don't believe, unless they're on Cryptic Command main deck. And now they're just going to fire up everything. There's just nothing else they can really do. They're going to make us see the correct play here. So the correct play, of course, is to block their big thing with the Goyf and then block something that does not kill the Scoo's. So it's potentially a little bit scary if they have a Lord to Violin. If their last card in hand that's unknown is a Lord, then they get to trade with the Scoo's. And then we would be, let's see, yeah, we'd be dead actually. But they don't have the Lord, and the reason I blocked that way, so if we had blocked a different thing with Scoo's, sorry, let's rewind that. It's been a long league. I'm getting ahead of myself. If we block another thing with Scoo's, we are not dead to the Lord being Viled in, but the Lord being Viled in is playing around their best possible card there, whereas now we could still reasonably lose to our own Bob trigger, even if they have absolutely nothing in hand, or if they have a suboptimal card in hand. So I chose to block this way, knowing that keeping the Scoo's alive means we are guaranteed to not die to our own Bob hit. And they don't have the Lord, so with the Bob trigger on the stack, we get to respond. We get to eat the 2 creatures that went to the yard, and we don't have a 4-drop in our main deck at all. So there's no possible way we die to the Confidant, and we flip a 1-drop anyway, and that's just going to do it. We'll send in everybody just for fun, and that's going to be game. So, stumbled over my words a little bit there trying to explain why I blocked the way I did. Again, that did leave us soft to them having exactly Lord of Atlantis or Master of the Pearl Trident as their last unknown card in hand. But they didn't, and I think on average the better play is to block how we did to ensure that we don't get got by Bob at the end. It would be not entirely unexpected to have so many painless hits with Bob over such a long game, only for us to have to trade off our Scoo's, go to 3, and flip a 3-drop on the last possible Bob hit. So keeping the Scoo's around, of course, allowed us to kill a creature and then eat it. We saved 2 life by blocking. I think it was the best overall play, but obviously, with Merfolk, they've got a lot of different possibilities there. They could have had the Lord, we could have been in trouble, but they didn't, and as I said, their opening hand was scary, their top decks were a lot less scary. We definitely had the luxury of time, and that played to our advantage with Dark Confidant showing up really, really big there. Not only showing us a lot of new cards, mostly painless ones, but also getting in for 6 or maybe even 8 points of damage over the course of the game. Hexdrinker breaking through the board stall like a champ. Absolutely awesome, and Skooz, of course, keeping us alive along the way. So it was a good game. We didn't draw any kill spells. Isn't that remarkable? We're against a tribal, aggressive tribal deck, an Ether Vial deck that probably plays a creature count well into the 30s when you count the creature lands for sure. And we didn't draw a single kill spell. All we had was a couple Fields of Ruin, and we still got there. So, really unusual game, really interesting and close game. And let's take a look at how we sideboard against Mono Blue Merfolk. Okay, so Triple Plague Man to join the ranks with the one that's in the main deck. Obviously awesome here. Liliana the Last Hope is quite nice. A lot of the Merfolk are native X1s, so if you can use your other kill spells to kill the Lords, Liliana can have a field day against them. Collective Brutality, again, they're all X1s or X2s natively. Most of the time you've got a high enough density of kill spells. The game we just saw notwithstanding, right? Most of the time you've got a high enough density of kill spells that Brutality can pull its weight in some way, shape, or form. It's just a fine way to round out your interaction. So these 5 cards are all definites. Now, Liliana's Triumph's an interesting one. Obviously, the more removal, the better, but against Merfolk, I don't exactly know that I like it. They just go a little bit too wide, and they have a little bit too many options in terms of, like, a lot of their stuff has already gotten value by the time they're happy to toss it away to an Edict, or they can fire up a creature land, and specifically because I know my buddy is on the full 8 creature lands, I can just see Liliana's Triumph being a little bit subpar. So it's playable, but I don't believe I would want it in this exact scenario. Tireless Tracker is also a pretty good card, but it's a little bit slow, obviously, especially on the draw. I think it is usable, though, so we'll have to keep both of these cards in mind as we look at what comes out. Nothing else is terribly interesting to me, and so here's how I like to side against Merfolk. Remember, we are on the draw. An Unearth can come out. They are going to play Relic of Progenitus, keeping our graveyard clear, and they're not going to put that many things in the graveyard to begin with. So Unearth, while the floor on it is fine as a cycler, it's still a pretty bad card here in my opinion. Liliana the Veil, I think shaving 1 on the draw is totally fine. Even on the play is totally fine. Again, all the man lands, all the go-wide strategies. She's okay. She's good. She's even good, but, you know, you can definitely cut down 1 and not really miss her. And I like to treat Merfolk to some degree like halfway between a mid-range matchup and an aggro matchup, and against both of those archetypes, Thoughtseize is not the very best. So cutting at least 2 Thoughtseizes is fine. I also like to trim a Tarmogoyf, specifically because of the card Merfolk Trickster. So in addition to them having relics and everything else, Merfolk Trickster is basically a kill spell for a Tarmogoyf if it's attacking or blocking. So these 5 cards can definitely come out. Now, again, do we want the Liliana's Triumph? I don't really know. I don't really think so, but I don't think it would be terrible to play it or anything. But Tireless Tracker, however, I think we can make room for the second tracker. I think that's going to be good enough. So remember, we're on the draw here. On the draw, for Dark Confidant, it's a little bit sketchy. We saw how clunky it was to have a bunch of extra ones rotting in hand, and we saw how the opponent we just faced, a great example of sideboard against what you've seen. The opponent allowed the Dark Confidant to go uncontested for a long time without making a trade. So, granted, that was probably the right play given the context of the game, but the point is, it's not like we should necessarily expect Bob to die. So I think on the draw we can trim a Bob, get that tracker, and get the painless late-game inevitability of the tracker, the big threat. Now, if we did want to bring in the Liliana's Triumph, well, we could probably cut a second Liliana of the Veil. We could also maybe go down discard, but on the draw, specifically to protect against Spreading Seas, I like to play more discard, so we've got 5 copies there. I think that's totally fine. I think I like this setup a lot. Then on the play, we do want to bring back the 4th Dark Confidant. If we take him to, if they take us rather to Game 3, we'll be on the play. We bring back the Bob, and at that point, you probably just play with only 4 discard spells. You can cut the Thoughtseize. Inquisition's going to hit everything we care about. Master of Waves is out of favor right now. It may or may not be in the deck. Even if it's in the deck, I think I rate Inquisition more highly anyway. We can usually beat Master of Waves one way or another, and I'd rather not lose the life. So, in any case, for the match you are about to see, we are set up just like that. So we're on the draw against Merfolk. The hand's a keep. It's an underwhelming keep. We want to see a copy of discard since we left 5 copies in. We cannot play well around Spreading Seas with this hand in terms of how we sequence our lands. Obviously, it's really nice to go fetch land, pass against a potential turn 2 Spreading Seas when we are on the draw. However, the good news is we do have enough lands with enough variety and utility that we're unlikely to get seized out of the game entirely. Beyond that, Scooze is a good card in the matchup. Definitely a good, solid card. Trophy's okay. It hurts to ramp them early, that's for sure. They have so many mana sinks and, and all that we definitely don't want to see this early compared to other things, but it's a fine card in general. And, of course, the Plague Man is our guy, so we're going to keep it. And the opponent is liking 7 as well. And my client was lagging tremendously during this game, so hopefully that won't come back to hurt us during this replay. I'll just have to use the next turn function if it does. The opponent goes Fairy Conclave pass, we go Overgrown Tomb pass, having drawn another land. More Fields of Ruin is not a terrible thing, right? And sure enough, the opponent's got turn 2 Seize, so thankfully we are able to play around this. And I went ahead and ran out the Scooze because were kind of reluctant to trophy early on, especially because they seized our black land. So even if they don't seize this forest, we'd have to shock in, which is bad against another seize, and then trophy early is also bad. We're just not that likely to grow the Goyf anytime soon is the point. I'd rather play my Grizzly Bear. Opponent does not have a third land, but they do have Ether Vial, Relic of Progenitus, so lots of value on the field, and we just keep drawing lands. Again, mixed feelings about that. At this point, I'm starting to get a little bit over it, though, right? So we have a free run at the Blooming Marsh, and we could play Goyf and hold up a Scooze activation for all the good that does, but I would rather take them off of one of these utility lands here while we have the freedom to do so. And since we have another field in hand, and since the opponent is not curving out their land drops anyway, they're unlikely to be able to aggressively activate the Conclave early on, I'd rather take them off of the Canopy land. So we hit Waterlogged Grove, we go get a Swamp, and then it's going to be back to us. This also helps us further fix our mana, and they do have the second Spreading Seas. Interesting to wonder whether they were sitting on that for another black land or whether they just top-decked it. But either way, still no third land for the opponent, but the Vial is going to be active in the near future. And we just keep hitting lands. Yet again, just keep hitting lands. Tarmogoyf is our only real play there unless we were inclined to shock in Overgrown Tomb, but I'm just not inclined to do that. We just rather play it patient, play it safe with our life total, play out a Blooming Marsh. Keep this tomb in our back pocket in case there's yet another Spreading Seas and we need down the line, really need a black land on our own terms, right? Opponent's got Harbinger of the Tides to bounce our Scooze. They're going to Relic to keep the Goyf a non-factor, and then it is back to us. We draw Collective Brutality. Okay. So that's a kill spell, that's interaction, it's not ramping them, unlike Trophy. And the one risk of just brutalitying away that Harbinger is that they could have a Lord to Violin. But if they have the Lord to Violin, then we shock in our tomb, we play the Plague Engineer, we finish off the Harby. So I like the brutality there, and we are going to just simply kill it. I was tempted to drain for 2 because we've got all these lands, but again, with Spreading Seas, with Scavenging Ooze, with Field of Ruin, we've got the mana sinks, and we've been disrupted enough with mana that I didn't feel the need to. We are still at 20 life after all. Now, we are going to attack with the Goyf here. It's possible the opponent's got Merfolk Trickster, as I said in the sideboard tech, but that's not going away anytime soon, and sure enough they do. But, the Goyf is not that big of a factor with a Relic on the field anyway, right? So, if nothing else, this gives us fuel for the Scooze, right? So, we're going to go ahead and shock in now at this point, play the Scooze, and eat something while we have the chance. So, getting the Scooze up to a 3-3 is actually pretty big game, all things considered right now. So, I'm pretty happy with how that went, despite it being a really strong 1-for-0 that the opponent did to us with the Merfolk Trickster. But that's why we side out a Tarmogoyf. It's not at its best right now. Opponent's got a Coral Helm Commander. So it's a level up creature. It gives an interesting, decent dimension to the deck. We know this with our own Hexdrinker, right? But definitely not the greatest situation for the commander with 2 lands on the field. And we draw Dark Confidant, so that's a pretty good draw. And that actually makes me a lot happier with the state of my late game inevitability. So despite the fact that we don't get a clean kill here with the Plague Engineer, I'm very happy to simply develop my board, have a really mana efficient turn of Bob into Plague Man into a tapped Blooming Marsh, and just sitting back, just playing it nice and cautiously. And the opponent's got a Merfolk Trickster, another one, not that bad. Definitely better than a Lord would be at this stage. We want to fade the Lords. They do have Island Walk ready to go. And Harbinger of the Tide. So that's kind of a build your own Reflector Mage, right? They tap down the creature with Trickster, and then they bounce a tapped creature with Harpy. So sure, you got it. And then they'll Relic away Argoyf. And they've got 3 cards in hand, so we're still similar on resources, but the big difference is we've got 1,000,000 lands and they still only have 2. So, and we're drawing 2 per turn now with the Confidant. Bob will flip Hexdrinker, we drew Fatal Push, so we're starting to get there. Starting to really get there in terms of action. We're going to play the Hexdrinker, and here is where our plethora of lands really comes in. It feels really nice to use these blue lands for something great, right? So we're going to put the Hexdrinker all the way up to level 3, if we can, before the lands are untapped in case of Dismember or Vapor Snag or similar. Opponent will, in response to that activation, Vial in Phyrexian Revoker. Nice spicy sideboard tech against us. And, nope, let's not skip too far ahead. Okay, we're back, my friends. I misclicked, but better to misclick in the replay than in the actual game, right? So as we were, we're leveling up Hexdrinker, and then the opponent will, in response to the 3rd activation, Vial in Phyrexian Revoker. And Revoker is going to name Hexdrinker. Now, I think if that's the play, I think you're supposed to do that just in response to the first one. Like, this still allows us to achieve the basic floor of a 4/4 and protection from instants, which is very relevant given the context of the board here. And all that. Now, granted, they might have wanted to eat up some of our mana for the turn, but I think what you either do is do it right away or let me sink even more mana into it, or have the chance to sink even more mana into it. I don't think you want to do it there. In any case, that's what happens, so Hexdrinker is not going to hit level 8 until we answer the Revoker. Good news is we do have a Fatal Push in hand. Now, a part of me would want to simply just push the Revoker right here, right now, but being good friends with our opponent here, I am pretty familiar with how Merfolk players tend to sideboard against us, and counter magic is usually not a big part of the plan. So it's not like we have to do it now to play around counter magic. Forces of Negation should be out. Deprive or similar is unlikely to be in. Even if they can counter our Fatal Push next turn, it's not the end of the world. We don't need Hexdrinker to win this game. We've got other things going on. So for all of those reasons, I'm pretty happy to play Scooze, and rather than push while the coast is clear, we're just going to pass. And we can confuse the opponent's game plan and disrupt their game plan better, of course, by doing it on the end step, or just saving it for, in case they top deck a Lord. That's really why we kind of need to save the Fatal Push, right? So, but the opponent's main phase in Coral Helm activations, and they don't have any Ether Vial activations, so we're just going to let all that happen, and then we do have Fatal Push still on the menu for the end step, and we'll go ahead and hit that Revoker, and it'll resolve, so that's a beautiful thing. Bob, once again, with the painless flips, Bob is just killing it this game, and now we get to see if they have any more interruptions for our Hexdrinker. I leveled it up once, and then I said, let's check the hand with Inquisition. We're going to do it this turn anyway. Might as well just do it now, but there's no real rhyme or reason to that sequencing. Could have done it right at the start, and I don't think there's anything they can have now that Hexdrinker was a natural level 3 to stop us. But in any case, They will Violin another Coral Helm. We get Silvergill Adept out of their hand. Here's Plague Man doing the work, keeping this thing just shut off. They could, of course, have vialed it in just for the redraw, but that's obviously great for us, too. So, Plague Man pulling his weight, as always, in these types of matchups. And then, it's just Hexdrinker time. Like, we've got a couple things to eat with the Skoos, and that's all well and good, but hey, that can wait. We're still at 16 life. Let's make our mini Progenitus, right? Let's get protection from everything and become a 6/6. Seems pretty good. So we've still got Trophy in hand for backup. We're going to gain a life with Skoos this turn. And the opponent's facing down the Hexdrinker. Opponent's going to finally crack that relic on the end step. Desperately digging for action. We'll just gain our life in response while we have the chance. And now we just have to not die. We just have to not die this turn. Or maybe over the course of 2 turns. But if it's the latter, then it means they didn't really send in their whole team. So the opponent's just firing everything up, and look, they did finally find a Lord, and they do have Island Walk, so that's actually a little bit scary, but fortunately, we are at a really high life total, and fortunately, the Plague Engineer debuff is definitely keeping us alive. If we didn't have that debuff, we would just be dead. Like, Merfolk with Island Walk can just turn the corner on you out of nowhere. All of the blockers in the world don't matter, because they just Island Walk right past you, but we only go down to 4, and technically there are some things that could kill us. So definitely an interesting spot. The opponent actually scooped before this trigger resolved, but I think we would have been priced into trophying with the Bob trigger on the stack. We trophy one of their things, and then we eat the thing with the Skoos, just so we don't die to Kalitas, basically. I think, or no, do we even have... Sorry, I'm getting my list mixed up from donation leagues. I don't even know if we have a 4-drop in the deck. Maybe we just don't. Maybe we're just alive no matter what we do. But in any case, we got there, and it ended up actually being really close in the end. Both games ended up being really close. Lots of back and forth, lots of slowness and stall and cagey play through the mid-game, and then the Merfolk just try to turn the corner, and sometimes they will get you that way. In these 2 situations, they did not. Thanks once again to Hexdrinker for clocking out the game, Scavenging Ooze for stabilizing us, and Confidant for pulling us ahead on resources. It was a really, really great display, both games from Bob. And we had Goyf doing a lot of legwork in Game 1 as well. Here the Goyf meta, bit more of an ignominious end, right? But Plague Engineer stepped in the gap really well, kept us alive. Just a really good game, really good couple games here. And like I said at the beginning, very talented Merfolk player across from us, and the Merfolk matchup these days is a little bit tougher than it used to be, especially on a build like this, despite Plague Man, simply because these Canopy lands, the Waterlogged Grove, are very, very good against us in a deck that can afford to leverage them like this Aether Vial deck can. They've got the free win potential of Spreading Seas against a land light hand, and, cards like Coral Helm Commander can grind pretty well, along with all of their natural 2-for-1s, and Merfolk Trickster getting free kills on our Tarmogoyf. There's just a lot to be wary about with this matchup, but at the end of the day, they are a fair creature deck. Everything they have dies to Fatal Push. Just about everything they have dies to Collective Brutality. Dies to Trophy, dies to Pulse, dies to Decay. Oftentimes dies to Plague Engineer too, so we've got a lot of really great tools in the matchup. It's an interesting one, and we did get there. So great games as always, my friend. Well played, and we advanced to 3-1 in the league, taking down the fish. See you for round 5. Final round here, ladies and gents. We are on the play, and it's a perfectly fine, valid, functional 7. We don't like to see these 7s with interaction that we're not sure is going to be good. That's why discard is so good in our deck, but we've been seeing a lot of hands kind of like this, and something in these game 1s, in my view, you just have to keep them and hope they line up. Or hope the top deck provides, as the case may be. So we're going to go Verdant Catacombs pass. Lets us fetch an Overgrown Tomb on the end step, or even fetch around the turn 1 Blood Moon, as the case may be. But the opponent goes Blackcleave Cliffs, looting, pitching Bloodghast, and Hogaak. So You guys didn't think we were going to finish a full league without playing against Hogaak, did you? That just doesn't happen anymore. He just, like, you have to assume you're going to see this card at least once in a 5-round league. It's just how it is. Just how it is. And thankfully, we do have a turn 2 Scooze on the play. And our main deck Plague Engineer makes an appearance. So, you know, our hand is pretty good considering. We just have to hope the opponent does not manage the turn 2 Hogaak, but they've got Looting turn 1, Stitcher Supplier turn 2. That's a recipe for a turn 2 Hogaak. If they've got another black creature, and they sure do, they've got a second land, so Bloodghast will come back. Mire will fill up the graveyard enough for Hogaak, and on top of that, they've got Carrion Feeder as well. So quite the explosive turn 2 play from the opponent. They even get to leave their Faithless Looting around. What a turn. What a turn. We draw Fatal Push. Fatal Push is a card that I think initially underestimated in the matchup, and or it just got a lot better now that Bridge from Below is banned. I really don't mind seeing pushes so much, but really our play here is obviously to trophy and then eat the Hogaak. That's just all we can really do. So opponent will send in Bloodghast and Hogaak. No attack with the Carrion Feeder quite yet. And no attack with the Supplier either. So trophy the Hogaak. While we're still in attacks, might as well eat the Hogaak. And then we assign the block on the Bloodghast. They, of course, sack it to Feeder for value. They can get it back anyway, but means we took no damage this turn. So, hey, as far as beating a turn 2 Hogaak progression goes, we're doing all right. We're doing all right. But the opponent's got more gas in hand. They play Satyr Wayfinder second main, and they mill over another Bloodghast and a Carrion Feeder and a Vengevine. And then they sack the Supplier to the Feeder. They find a Gravecrawler. They fetch. They get both Bloodghasts back. And then it's not over yet because they get to cast Gravecrawler from the yard, and then Vengevine returns. So talk about explosive plays. Then on top of that, they sack the Gravecrawler just to put another counter on Carrion Feeder, because why not? They get to buy him back anyway. And then after that, they'll finally pass back to us. What a deck, huh? Lots of people are saying Hogaak still needs another ban. It might even need 2 bans. Maybe Looting and Hogaak both need to go. That's not the time or place to discuss it, but let's just say I don't necessarily disagree. So what do we do here? Well, a few options. Number one, we could just lean on Plague Engineer. We could just say Plague Engineer, naming Vampire or naming Zombie, pass to you. But the more, like, they've still got 4 cards in hand after doing all that, so the more we let them just keep filtering, the more inevitability they have. So I did feel obligated to eat the Faithless Looting there. I think that's a totally fine play. And that also allows us to just pass with a Fatal Push-Up, which we might need for the Carrion Feeder this turn, and a Scooze activation. So if we can get the opponent to go at least halfway all in on the Feeder, we might be in okay shape, because we're going to push the Feeder, we're going to eat something, maybe a Bloodghast if we have a good window for it, we're maybe have another good block. We're going to have to take a hit from Vengevine at the minimum this turn, but, you know, Scooze really can stabilize us in a situation like this. And I do like eating the Looting because that reduces their inevitability, but their hand seems to just be awesome anyway, because they've got another Wayfinder in hand. Putting another Looting and another Gravecrawler in the yard. They cast the Crawler before we receive priority to eat it. And, yeah, that just made their board and their graveyard a whole lot better. So what can you do? They've just kind of got an insanely resilient progression here, but we're going to try to execute the same game plan. We'll block a Bloodghast here, knowing that at least will be something I'm happy to eat. Whether they sack it or whether we just kill it in combat. So they're going to sack a Bloodghast, sack a Gravecrawler, and then we get to Fatal Push the Carrion Feeder. So again, stemming the tide as well as we can, and then before we leave the phase, we'll eat the Bloodghast in case they have another land to try to get it back with, like a fetch land. And that's about all we can do. So we're down to 12, they replay the Crawler, and they play a land, and we draw Field of Ruin. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, obviously colored lands are a little bit better here in this situation, but And I really don't mind hitting a 4th land. It just gives us more room to operate. It gives us the freedom to finally play a 3-drop Plague Man without going shields down on our other effects. And I do think that's a little bit better here than playing Tarmogoyf, because they're just wide enough and they have enough recursion that they can suicide into the board. We name Zombie, we're keeping a whole lot of stuff off the field as long as Plague Man is around. And right now our Scooze is going to outsize everything they have, including that Vengevine. So we just have to hope the opponent doesn't hit even more gas at this stage of the game. And they have another Satyr Wayfinder. Pretty scary. And it's going to mill Golgari Thug, a 3rd Gravecrawler, and a Stitcher Supplier. So then it's going to be Faithless Looting here, and this might be where I should have taken action. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I'm remembering this correctly. I think I just let it go to see what they could find, and maybe was supposed to eat the Golgari Thug. If this replay ever catches up to us, then we'll know for sure. But yeah, so eating the Thug, it's tough though. It's tough to say we should definitely eat the Thug, because they could have more cards in hand. They could have another supplier in hand. That it's just really hard to say. It might be a case of just having to eat the Thug and make them have more though, right? I see the text box here has changed, so it looks like we're making some progress. I don't want to just skip the turn, but maybe we have to. That's not what happened. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what happened. They dredged off of the Faithless Looting with the Golgari Thug. They hit a Hogaak. We can't stop the Hogaak, so all we can do is, grow the Scooze a little bit, try to stabilize, but we didn't draw a kill spell for the Hogaak, and we just lost to it. We trade off with the Plague Engineer, but then their board was too wide. The Gravecrawlers come back. It was just not quite enough. So sorry the replay function failed us there, but the game ended in like another turn or two. I don't think it's worth me just redoing this whole thing. We're at the end of a long league anyway, right, my friends? And you guys know how Hogaak works. So yeah, maybe my play there that I had to do was eat the Thug in response to the Faithless Looting. That could be the one kind of narrow window in which we didn't maximize our abilities here. But yeah, at some point you hope they just stop hitting the gas. Like triple Wayfinder on the heels of the turn 1 looting into turn 2 supplier, turn 2 Hogaak and Carrion Feeder and Bloodghasts, and then all that stuff on top of it. It was just too much to handle. It was a minor miracle that our deck was able to keep up with it to begin with, especially game 1. But like I said, Scooze on the play, trophy to kill Hogaak, Plague Engineer doing a lot of work, Fatal Push, taking care of Feeder. Like, we have the tools. Didn't quite manage it here. And look, even if the opponent did fail to hit the Hogaak here, or even if I hit the Thug in response, maybe they just have yet another enabler in hand, or maybe they just flash back looting and get the Hogaak in their next turn. So maybe that buys us one more turn to top deck a trophy, but really we're probably just cold to that Hogaak no matter what we did. So their deck is super consistent, super resilient, and despite us having a pretty good progression, we did get buried by the Hogaak and by the wide board after a good close game. So in any case, that's how it went game 1. Let's take a look at the side. So against Hogaak Vine, the more I play the matchup, the more I really like all 4 Plague Engineer. This card is awesome. The card is so awesome in this matchup, if you ask me. Surgical, Spellbomb, and Grafdigger's Cage, all very good as well. So those 8 cards come in, and then I like the second Collective Brutality more on the play than on the draw. So let's see what we have to come out. 4 Lilianas of the Veil, those are our worst card. Abrupt Decay is just kind of our least efficient and least flexible removal. Tireless Tracker, very slow, pretty happy to cut it, especially on the play when we want all 4 bobs. And I like moving away from a Hexdrinker. It's just kind of our most mana-intensive and least impactful threat, I think, overall. I think leveraging 1 is still fine, but, we want to leave in most of our discard, we want to leave in most of our fatal pushes, but, again, we can shave 1 on the play when we're more threat-dense and more proactive and have to be less reactive. And I really like the one of Unearth here because they bring in a lot of kill spells. They kill our Scoozes and our Tarmogoyfs, not infrequently, even our Plague Engineers. So leaving in the Unearth is good. And I think these are our 8 weakest cards. We need to leave in all of our trophies so we can kill and then eat Hogaak, or kill and then extract, or kill and then spellbomb. Again, as I said, Brutality is pretty good on the play, I think, or at least decent. And we have, everything else at the 3-drop slot's pretty solid. So client is bugging out right now. I hope this does not kill my video, so I'm just not doing anything right now. We've come so far. Don't do this to me, client. This is what I get for zooming in. Hitting Q to zoom in is just too much for the software to handle. The client's been bugging lately, though. Like I said, it was really, really laggy during my Merfolk game. I've had a couple situations like this where the screen gets big and you've got the blue circle of doom as we're loading into games, so I don't know what it is, but just lately, MTGO, never a paragon of smooth software design, has been even worse than usual, so I'm just not touching anything, hoping this resolves itself. But as I was saying, the second Collective Brutality, definitely happier with it on the play than I am on the draw. Here we go. We're safe. We made it. So we can therefore cut a Thoughtseize as well to make way for it. On the draw, however, if we manage to take them to a game 3, that Thoughtseize will come back out. The second Brutality comes out, the Thoughtseize goes back in. Otherwise, all the changes pretty much stay the same, and I'm not going to touch anything else, so you heard me. You know what to do. Not moving the cards around. We don't want to crash the client, crash the video. And with that in mind, with that setup in mind, we'll see you for game 2. And here we are for game 2, my friends. This is the 4th take I've had. We keep getting a bug in the early stages of this game that really just ruins everything. So I restarted the client. Hopefully it was just something wonky that happened when it started spazzing out during our sideboarding, and hopefully it's safe. It's fixed now. Because I do remember watching this replay like right after it happened, and it went through totally fine. So in any case, let's assume it's going to work. We kept a 7 that was very safe and very resilient, but also a little bit slow. If we hit the right top decks, it can compete with a good opponent's curve out. And if they stumble, if they mulligan at all, it's very, very good to keep double Ooze into Plague Man on the play. On the draw, I think this would be a mulligan no matter whether no matter what. But we kind of hoped they didn't have the perfect hand, and they did have a keep of 7, turn 1 Stitcher Supplier, which is pretty much exactly how they want to open a game. So now we have to fade the turn 2 Hogaak as always. So we're going to play the Scooz. And the opponent's got an Affection Shock, not a good sign. Sadder Wayfinder, and there it works. The bug was not showing that the Hogaak returned, which of course changes everything, and then everything else was falling apart from there too. So we've got a functional replay. I'm happy. Sometimes it tests my patience, but I'm very happy. So we have drawn lands and a Bob. Not the very best, but we've just got to try to compete. So we're gonna use our mana this turn very efficiently. All 3 for Plague Man, and unfortunately we kind of have to give them that death trigger with our shields totally down. No Spellbomb, no Surgical, no Scooz activation, but naming Zombie is the best way to stem the bleeding from here on out, and they already have the Hogaak, so hopefully they can't do too much damage to us from there. And we also kind of want more fuel in the yard for Scooz anyway. So, but we're on the ropes. I mean, they've got a full hand. They've got a Hogaak on the field. We don't have any great way to do things here. So we just have to take the hit. And if the opponent's got a kill spell for the Ooze, we might be in trouble despite having another one in hand. We definitely don't want to see that. The opponent's going to flash back eluding and just get rid of a couple lands, so they're sculpting their hand for the future if we do manage to answer the Hogaak. We draw another Scooz, and this must be the first time in the history of this matchup that I am not pumped to draw a Scavenging Ooze, because we just already have We already have two, So instead we're actually going to play a Dark Confidant, and here's why. I want to diversify my threats, and I'm definitely priced into trading Plague Engineer off with Hogaak. It's still going to trample, so we're taking a minimum of 6 next turn. We're going to go to 5. And this is going to unlock all of their zombies. So we need more action and more answers off of the Confidant, or we might need to trade him off this turn with aggressive attackers if they've got a bunch of haste threats coming. So if we're trading off, I'd rather trade off a Bob than a Scooze. And if we're not, we need to hit more spells, and we need to hit more lands to really lean heavily on the Scooze. But either way, we're in a whole lot of trouble here. Just the fact that they did get the turn 2 Hogaak really punishes us for keeping a strong but slow hand in the matchup. But they don't have anything better to do than main phase another looting. I really assumed they would, so I didn't bother to eat the looting in the main phase. And they just loot away a couple of claims, so they were flooded, and they were flooded with claims. And now it's Hogaak time, and now we've got to follow the plan and trade off with the Plague Man. So again, we take 6, because it's got trample on top of everything else, why not? And then of course we're going to eat it before they leave the phase. And it's a minor miracle the opponent has nothing else, so we're pretty happy to eat another creature, grow the ooze, and Bob is going to show us a painless land. So the play of Bob has paid off thus far. It's letting us curve out, and now I am inclined to crack the Peatland aggressively simply because we have so many non-green sources on the field anyway that like having a third painful green source, not necessarily the most impactful. So we're looking for more action. We're looking for Spellbomb. We'll take Inquisition, it's fine. And they have another Hogaak in hand, so that's a little bit brutal, but nothing we can do about that. Double Gravecrawler, Carrion Feeder, Bloodghast. Well, I think it's safe to say they're going to get their second black creature to cast the other Hogaak, so we just take the biggest threat, which would be Carrion Feeder, and leave them with that very, very frightening Hogaak in hand. Not much we can really do about it. However, I am inclined to attack here. And the reason for that is we just need to put as many creatures in the graveyard as possible for our Scooze, and we also need to end the game as quickly as possible. So if Bob trades off here, well, we're not taking any more Bob hits, and we're not taking the Wayfinder hit. And if it doesn't, well, we're that much closer to potentially ending the game. We are in race mode now, even though we have to continue disrupting as much as possible. There's just only so much disruption you can pull off against the Hogaak. And keeping the board clear, granted they have enough cards in hand to get the Hogaak back anyway, but, it's definitely better to keep the board clear to try to strand the Hogaak in hand in general. But in this case, they're just going to go Gravecrawler, and we know it's coming, so we're going to eat some creatures and let them do their thing here. Casting the big boy, out of hand, playing the other Blackcleave Cliff, still got a Bloodghast in hand, and we draw Tarmogoyf. So how can we manage to get ourselves over the line here? Sadly, we don't have a kill spell in hand. If we did, we could actually outsize the Hogaak this turn if we had like a Fatal Push and a third green source, but we don't. So instead, we're going to play out a land, and we're going to play out the Tarmogoyf. It looks like we're going to need to use the Tarmogoyf like we used the Plague Man, except instead of trading with Hogaak and getting trampled over, it's just going to kind of chump block, but keep us alive. And again, keep the graveyard a little bit more full. So, fortunately, the opponent does not have a removal spell. If they did, we'd be pretty dead. But no removal for the opponent, so we've got to throw the Goyf under the bus here, under the Avatar. We're down to 5, and we are very much on the ropes. The opponent's got a Stitcher Supplier, a little bit scary, but they've got a Vengevine here, and it makes you wonder why they didn't do that main phase. Maybe we just had the Scooze activation up, but in theory they could have overloaded our Scooze activation, maybe. So in any case, now they're going to try to get the Vengevine back, and we are at least going to be able to eat that. And maybe they just didn't want to give the Scooze any more food in general. But We've got too many black lands for our own good. It's back to us, and we draw another Tarmogoyf, another green card. Not exactly what the doctor ordered, but Field of Ruin coming in pretty clutch here, actually allowing us to spend 3 black mana, or colorless mana, to turn it into 1 green mana, which is good, which is a good rate right now. And then we just throw down another Tarmogoyf. The Goyfs are going to help us hold the line against these weenies. And the Scooze is a 7/7, set to grow to a 9/9. There's no need to eat anything main phase. Like, they have a Hogaak is legendary, remember that, so we don't need to eat the one in the yard quite yet. And the Scooze actually outsizes the Hogaak, so once again we have to fade a removal spell. If they don't have that, then we might, against all odds, be in with a shot of stabilizing. The opponent's turning the entire board sideways, so we just have to really do the math here and assign the correct blocks. Like, if they have removal, no matter what, we're going to die. So, while technically it's the better practice to assign the block first, doesn't matter. So we're going to just eat both things, and then we're going to go to blocks. And look at that. We stabilize at exactly 1 life. You've got to love it. Exactly 1 life against the all-out assault. And opponent's totally tapped out, so they can't get the Hogaak back. And they're actually just dead on the crackback, because it turns out a 9/9 Scooze with an assist from a Tarmogoyf will end the game pretty darn quickly. So I don't know if the opponent didn't do the math, or if they slightly miscalculated, or if they just said, we need to turn them all sideways and make the opponent see the right line, because we're not beating them if they get to untap with the Scooze for yet another turn. I don't know, but in any case, we were pretty unfortunate to be on the receiving end of such a good curve out relative to our hand. At the same time, we were fortunate that they just never drew a kill spell for our Ooze. At any stage of the game, if they had that, we just don't win. But we just barely scraped by for the nth time in this league, making the stand at 1 life, turning the corner, and getting there in a really interactive, really fair way. So this has been a really, really interesting league as far as that goes. Some really long, really intense games, but we've got Game 3 to go to. We're playing for the 4-1. We're going to be on the draw. See how it goes. Final game of this league, my friends. We're on the draw. I've been having issues with this one too, and we had to mulligan that hand, so it looked a lot similar to the one we kept last game. But there's a few crucial differences. Number 1, it doesn't have as much green mana. Number 2, it's got 1 Scooze and 2 Plague Men instead of the reverse ratio, which is much worse. And number 3, we're on the draw. We just had to mull it. And unfortunately, the opponents kept 7. So do we go to 5 in search of our actual hard hate? Or do we try to beat them with this 6? It's pretty rough stuff either way, but I think we're going to keep it. Of course, we're going to bottom one of these extraneous fields, and, Fatal Push is definitely something that can stem the early tide, and also pairs well with Scooze, so we're putting our faith in the Scooze yet again, and the opponent thankfully has turn 1 Carrion Feeder. It's an excellent card, but it's not the turn 1 looting, and it's not the turn 1 supplier, so all things considered, I'm pretty happy. Opponent's going to go ahead and attack with the feeder. We're going to Effect Shock and Fatal Push before damage. And then they've just got a Bloodghast as a follow-up. Definitely not the most explosive start we've ever seen. Apparently they thought the feeder Bloodghast synergy was enough early action and pressure to be, justify a keep against us rather than mulligan against our heavy interaction, which is fair enough. We have drawn Surgical, which is really, really nice. Gives me a little bit of a lifeline here, a little bit of breathing room, but we still are almost exclusively all in on the Scoo sticking, and the opponent has Bloodghast pitched to the Lightning Axe to make sure that doesn't happen, and then they've got a Fetch Land to follow it up, so we cannot even effectively Surgical the Bloodghast if we wanted to, which I don't know that we do, because, right now we can Pulse and Surgical them, but whether that's the best play is up for debate, and that would require them to have had to crack this Fetch Land, right, in the second main phase to do something else. Now we can't really do that, so instead we're going to aggressively crack our Peatland, looking for more action, looking for a Spellbomb or even discard or something, but we just draw Swamp. Pretty awful stuff, my friends, and we are at the risk of just kind of losing to Bloodghast beats, and We hope the opponent is at least kind of out of gas here, but shocking in for a Wayfinder is not exactly what I would call out of gas. And they mill over Vengevine, Carrion Feeder, and Hogaak. Pretty horrendous stuff, if you ask me. So, oh my god, the bug once again. Alright guys, so we're back. We're just hitting play in the hopes that the replay actually works this time. I've restarted the client multiple times, and it just keeps showing me extracting the Carrion Feeder, which of course is not what happened. It doesn't make any sense, given that they milled over the Hogaak and the Vengevine, right? But let's just see what the client shows us here. This is such an epic end to the league, it's a shame if we just get blown out. Hey, there it is, the Hogaak extraction. This is what really happened. So we extract the Hogaak from the deck and the graveyard and the hand and leave them with only Blackcleave Cliffs. So, awesome. The client is working now. Great. So, anyway, we successfully and barely avoid getting absolutely destroyed by Hogaak. They were not able to buy Vengevine back. Sadly, our draws continue to be terrible. Pulsing the Bloodghast doesn't do anything yet. Doesn't do anything anymore, rather, because they have haste. So even though we successfully extracted the Hogaak at the perfect time, and even though we had a Scooze and some other good stuff like the turn 1 Fatal Push for the Carrion Feeder, we are at risk of just losing to the Weenie Beats. And in fact, we're going to lose to the Weenie Beats next turn. We need something great. Even just a decent blocker alone doesn't really do it. What could we possibly have to get out of this? What can we draw? This is the draw. This is exactly the draw that gets us out of this, or at least gives us a shot, because not only does it let us buy back our beloved Scavenging Ooze, we've also still got 3 mana active, so we can eat the Vengevine, we can eat the Carrion Feeder, and we can eat the other Carrion Feeder, and I'm just doing it all main phase in case they have a Hogaak that they draw for turn, basically. Let's get the graveyard as clear as possible, get the Scooze as big as possible. We're not out of Lightning Axe range, but the opponent doesn't have one, so it doesn't look like it anyway. Instead, they merely play a Carrion Feeder, and they are going to suicide their board into the Scooze, just trying to force damage through. Makes total sense, and we're still really on the ropes. Especially with the Carrion Feeder, they get to sack for value after our block. So we're back down to 3, we're back in need of them to not have certain things, and of us to have certain things, and they're going to sack another Bloodghast before they deploy a land and bring them both back. So what a crazy piece of value there at the end of the game. And we draw dead yet again. It's been a bunch of dead draws, but we did draw the Unearth, so we can't complain too much. Unearth got us there, but the rest has been pretty bad. However, we do get to Maelstrom Pulse here now. It's been the end of a long league, the end of a long series in and of itself. This has been a grueling one, like much of them have been. Don't forget about these sack effects when you're on Maelstrom Pulse. You try to pulse a Bloodghast here, it will end very poorly. They just sack it to the feeder for value, and you don't get to tag the other ghasts. So instead, we have to just 1-for-1 the Carrion Feeder. Once again, going to eat at main phase to get out of Lightning Axe range, and then we are simply passing the turn, hiding behind our Scooze. Opponent rips a Faithless Looting off the top. You know they had at least 1 land in hand. That's very, very good. Before we receive priority, they will loot yet again. And they pick Stitcher Supplier and Cathartic Reunion. Very frightened of a Fatal Push as the last card, but it's just a Carrion Feeder. Again, a very good one. Very good one here, but the opponent chooses not to attack this time. Fine with me. We're going to eat, because presumably, because they can't get the Bloodghast back this time. So we'll eat the creature on the end step back to us. And who shows up but the Plague Man? You've got to love it. Name a better duo. Name a more iconic duo than Plague Engineer and Scavenging Ooze. Guys, I love these 2 cards lately. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely awesome. So with the Plague Man on the stack, the opponent's going to sack a Bloodghast. Interesting decision. Makes us decide what's better here to name Vampire or Zombie. I chose to name Vampire. We just shutting off the Bloodghasts is big, big game. And Plague Man can trade with the Carrion Feeder. Scooz is going to get frisky. 9/9 attacking, where it's such a high life total, it's actually totally relevant. A hardcast Vengevine might be a bit of a problem, but it's not off the top for the opponent. They just scoop it up. So, oh my god, guys, what an epic 4-1. Right on the ropes in all of our wins. Literally all of our wins. We stabilized at 1 life over several turns against humans. We, I believe, stabilized at 1 life against Phoenix. Is that correct, or am I making that up? Either way, we were very close with that rip of Finale of Promise off the top. If we didn't have exactly our last 2 plays as a Scooz activation with our last mana and a free Surgical Extraction, we would have probably gotten beat by that thing in the ice. And against Merfolk, both times we were we stabilized at 1 against Merfolk. We survived at 1 after that hit, eating things with Bob's Trigger on the stack with our Scooz. And here, we stabilized at 3 life, I guess. Just backs to the wall every single time and coming out ahead at the end. On the back of Scavenging Ooze, on the back of Plague Engineer. I want to put both of these cards on the thumbnail, but they've both been on all my recent thumbnails. They have both been absolutely great. So we've got to find another card for the thumbnail. We'll talk about that in the wrap-up, but that was a really well-earned, really satisfying 4-1. Alright guys, so as I was just saying, the Plague Man had so many blowouts today that he generated for us. The Scavenging Ooze was so crucial to so many of our victories. Bob had a really good display against Merfolk. Tarmogoyf was absolutely awesome here today. But all of these cards have, Goyf, I don't think we can give Goyf the thumbnail treatment when it got killed by a Merfolk Trickster. Otherwise, Goyf would probably be the prime candidate. And Bob was amazing, but we just didn't see him that much. And as I've said, we've seen Plague Man and Scooz on the thumbnail lately. So who's going to get it? Is it Hexdrinker? Hexdrinker broke the mirror both times with Merfolk, but otherwise was pretty poor. So very nice against Merfolk breaking the board stalls. But again, not really a Hexdrinker league. You know who gets it this time, my friends? Fatal Push. A really innocuous card, one we kind of take for granted. But if you think back, Fatal Push, turn 1 on the most recent game, definitely kept us alive against that Carrion Feeder that would otherwise have definitely put across too much damage for us to finally barely take over the game and win. Fatal Push was obviously good in other parts of that series as well. Was very nice against Merfolk, killing things, killing that Phyrexian Revoker after we tapped all the way out just on 1 mana. Obviously a big part of how we won against humans. The fact that they blind named Fatal Push with Meddling Mage, turn 2, round 1, game 1 on the play tells you everything you need to know about how efficient this card is as removal. And it even was able to stave off the assault of Phoenixes. Even when it's not at its best, the pure mana efficiency and the instant speed, never forget how important this card is to us. So Fatal Push, you get the thumbnail treatment this time around. And maybe the art will generate a little bit of controversy. I don't really like either Fatal Push art, to be honest, but I think most people prefer the regular one to the promo art that I have here. But, I would like to see an alternate art, something... I just didn't love the Kaladesh block theme, so maybe I'll never be satisfied with a Kaladesh-themed Fatal Push. But anyway, Fatal Push gets the thumbnail treatment, but there were lots of candidates today, and we gotta love that league, guys. That showed us playing to your outs, taking the game long, even in every single win that we had at various points, it looked really grim. But we had some decent top decks. We also had some bad top decks too, though it's not like we just curved out perfectly. We had some decent top decks, but really the power of a lot of our cards, the X for 1 potential, the stabilizing power of a lot of our cards, or the raw efficiency of something like Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant, these are what brought us there, and of course we had to interact a lot along the way to do it. So pretty happy with that 4-1. I think, just speaking for my own level of play, if I was newer to the deck, Like, if I was brand new to the deck like I once was, this could have ended as a 1-4, honestly. Like, definitely could have seen myself throw away a lot of these very narrow wins when I was much newer to the deck. So, just goes to show you, experience is its own reward. Staying loyal to your deck is its own reward. Now, again, if somebody is a BG rock fanatic and they pivot to Jund a little bit, that's not really leaving the archetype, right? But the people who are always chasing the latest, most powerful deck, Modern is just so volatile. I do not believe it rewards you to do that. If something is so good that you clearly must be playing it over anything else, it's going to be banned, right? So stick to your guns, stick to BG decks. If you're already watching this channel, you're probably already a BG player. Guys, stick it out. The meta gets better, the meta gets a little bit worse, doesn't matter. We can always pull out wins. Even when we have a league like today where we didn't have any fantastic matchups, we had a lot of mulligans, a lot of clunky progressions, and even during our wins, we had a lot of dead top decks. We can still scrape out the wins with enough experience and with things lining up, at least to a degree that makes our win possible. So I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry about the little bit of the stumbling blocks we tripped over at the end there with respect to the replay client. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We thought we were going to make it through a league without playing against Hogaak. Not only did we not dodge the Hogaak, we didn't dodge the replay function errors. So, Hogaak not only warps the format, it apparently warps the replay client. What can you do? But we got there. Hope you enjoyed this replay, and 4-1 is definitely very nice. My record continues to be relentlessly positive. I've had almost no negative leagues since Horizons came out, but the 5-0s have been fewer and further between as well. So we're stuck in more of a predictable set of outcomes. I'm lower variance in my outcomes these days. Hard to chalk that up to any one thing, but in any case, the results keep coming in positive, and that's more than you can really ever expect or ask for in a format as crazy as Modern. So I will take it, my friends. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you once again to all Patreon supporters, including our new Inquisitor, William Burgess. And remember, if you are enjoying this content, Patreon link is in the description below. And look forward to seeing you there and to seeing you on this channel. Let me know what you thought, as always, my friends, and stay tuned. More gameplay and other content to come. I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody has a wonderful day.